car engulfed in flames, a body inside. It must have been an accident, right? Was it? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Aeileen Conway. Viewer discretion is advised. Aeileen Conway was a wife and mother. They had 7 children. It was a big, very happy family, and they resided in Lawton, Oklahoma. Aeileen and her husband Pat had been married for 33 years when this case happened. And even after 33 years, they were still madly in love with each other. But one day in 1986, all of that came crumbling down. April 29th, 1986, 10:40 a.m., a local farmer there in Oklahoma notices some smoke billowing in the distance. He walks over and sees a car had been completely engulfed in flames. So he calls the police, and they arrive. The fire was so large and so intense that it took some time to get that fire out. They had noticed that there was a body inside the car as it was burning, but they couldn't get to it. They were able to finally get the fire out, and using the license plate, they found out that this car belonged to Mr. Pat Conway. The body inside would soon be identified as his 50-year-old wife, Aeileen Conway. Almost right away, police ruled this an accident. There were skid marks on the road that told investigators that the speed the car was going when it hit this barrier was about 50 to 60 miles per hour. So, case closed, it's over. Not so fast. Pat thinks something is very wrong here. He pressures police to look into this as it may be a murder. Now that should tell you right away, Pat had no involvement in this death, because they were fully prepared to say this was an accident and call it a day. But he was like, no, I think my wife was murdered. When he got home that day after the accident, he saw that Aileen's purse was still in the house. Her driver's license, everything was in there. The iron was out, it was plugged in and turned on. She had the hose running water into the pool. The bath was full of water, and the phone next to the bath was off the hook. The front door was closed, but there was a patio door that was open. All of this seemed to Pat like someone broke into that house with the intent of stealing stuff, but Aeileen was there, and so they had to get rid of her because she may have seen them. When Pat brought this to investigators, they actually believed him. They were really kind of on his side, saying, yeah, with all of that, all those circumstances, this may be more than what it seems. And also, why was Aeileen out there in the first place? It was here on this bridge in a very rural location, a location that Aeileen or Pat had never been to. And after checking, they found out that she knew nobody in this area at all. So again, why was she there? And they are still trying to figure that out. A couple of days after the accident or the death, possible murder happened, Pat and one of the investigators goes to the crash site and begins to look around. A couple hundred feet away from where the bridge was, where the car had crashed, they found this piece of paper, which was like a church notice. It was a notice for a church that Pat and Aeileen attended with their family. And this notice was from the service the previous Sunday. Well, Aeileen always drove with the windows rolled up, the AC turned on, and Pat said that was originally on the dashboard of the car. So how did it get a couple hundred feet away from the crash site, especially if the windows were rolled up? He thinks that somebody had basically placed her body in the car and pushed down the accelerator, which then caused the car to crash. They think they intended the car to go over the bridge and into the creek, but they messed up and the car ran into the side thing, the rail. But when they opened the door to get the accelerator, I guess, pushed down is when that piece of paper probably flew out. They also had arson investigators look into this to see if the fire had been caused by anything other than the crash. They determined that the material within the car was all basically caked in fire retardant material. They tested portions of another similar car where they just burned it with a torch, and then when they moved the torch away and the fire immediately went out. But when they take that same sample and put gasoline on it and then they use the torch, it lights up on fire and then the item is completely destroyed. So this was determined to be an arson. At this point, the investigators do believe that foul play was involved. The coroner would change the death from accidental now to undetermined. and they are now looking at this as a possible homicide case. They also found out that in their neighborhood, the neighborhood that they lived in, there was a series of robberies that happened over the past few weeks and months. Several houses have been broken into. And so it all makes sense that someone broke into her house, didn't realize she was there, saw her, they weren't wearing masks or anything, so they needed to silence her forever. Which is always kind of strange. It's like, you'll do a lot less time for robbery than you will for murder, so... But at this point, that person or persons, they've gotten away with it. Because nobody knows who did this to Aeileen. If she was murdered, her murderer has gotten away with it up until now, 2024. And this happened all the way back in 1986. We're looking at close to 40 years. If she was murdered, somebody somewhere out there knows the truth. And perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information about the mysterious death of Aeileen Conway, please contact the police in Lawton, Oklahoma at 580-581-3270. If justice needs to be served, please help her get it. Police have the person who organized this, but they do not have the killer. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Anita Green. Viewer discretion is advised. Way back in 1974, Anita Green here became a bookkeeper for this man, a man named Melvin Green. He owned and operated an accounting firm, and allegedly the two of them started a relationship even though both of them were married. And so 7 years after this relationship started, they both ended up divorcing their spouses and the two of them got married. Mel here, he was a controlling man. He basically made her sign a prenup that gave him complete and utter control of her. That basically she couldn't do a thing without his permission. Her friends were completely surprised as to why she even agreed to do it, but she did. Soon into this marriage, she began to express to her friends that she was scared for her life, that Mel had been threatening her. She would go to her synagogue, and that's her pictured right there, where she would tell members of her congregation about how Mel is this kind of scary dude. And she ends up, by the way, leading her congregation. And also begins to have an affair with the rabbi. And so Anita asks Mel for a divorce, and he is furious. He became extremely angry towards her. Eventually, he would agree to the divorce, but he was adamant that she continue to work for him as a bookkeeper. Anita would get extremely threatening letters from Mel over the course of the divorce proceedings, including a threat to kill her. And that apparently is what came to be on October 25th, 1990. In this recreation, Anita had parked her car in the parking lot of the building where they worked. And within moments, a gunshot rings out. People hear the shot. They run out. They find Anita. She is shot with a single gunshot wound through her head. She is not deceased at that point. She is rushed to the hospital. But eventually, after I think a few days, she ends up passing away. 3 witnesses would come forward to police. One of these witnesses said they saw Melvin walking out of a side entrance of the accounting firm, an entrance or exit that was literally never used by anyone, except for this one particular moment. This was literally within seconds of Anita pulling up to the building, being followed by a motorcycle. Anita was going to the building this day, specifically at 10:30 with a prearranged meeting with Mel to pick up her paycheck. He was very specific that she needed to be there at 10:30. And just before 10:30 is when he walked out of the building for just a few moments. Another witness had seen her car park, and the guy in a motorcycle parks his cycle on the wrong side of the road. He's then seen approaching Anita in her car. The witness then sees this man who is wearing his helmet still fire one shot into the car, run back to his motorcycle, and speed away. Another witness saw this motorcycle guy within a couple of minutes after the shooting took place. But they saw him without his helmet on. He had taken it off. And that witness gave this description of the man, and this is the composite drawing of him. However, no one has ever come forward to identify this person. But through the investigation, and they had very little physical evidence to actually prove this, but with circumstantial evidence and given their relationship, police arrested Melvin for orchestrating the hit on his wife, Anita, ex-wife, that he had paid someone to kill her. which explains why he had walked out that entrance that no one ever used to make sure that the motorcycle was pulling up behind her. And also, he prearranged this 10:30 a.m. specific meeting for her to pick up her paycheck. He goes on trial, and again, with very little physical evidence, he is convicted of hiring this hitman, and he is sentenced to life in prison without parole. One of Anita's very good friends, Michelle Samet, she would write a book on this case, and she would actually go to the prison and interview Melvin all the time. In her investigation, she found out that Melvin had sold $30,000 worth of, vintage coins that he collected just before the murder happened. Well, as she visits Melvin in prison one day, he says, "Oh, there's someone else coming to visit me right now, and you need to leave." Melvin told her that this man was someone very, very close to him, and that he would do anything for Melvin if he asked. And he said that he basically gave this man he gave him a home. He bought his house. Michelle has a very brief encounter with this man. This is a recreation, but she said this man looked identical to this sketch. She sees the man leaving in the parking lot and gets onto a motorcycle. Michelle believes that she came face to face with Anita Green's killer, that this was the hired hitman. Well, once she told Melvin about her theory about this $30,000 coin sale, she said that she thinks that he used those sales to hire this hitman. Well, ever since she told him her theory, she now gets threatening letters from Melvin. She's been getting harassing phone calls, and people are basically damaging her home and threatening her. She thinks it's the same man who killed Anita. Melvin Green would try to appeal his conviction a couple of times, but he always failed, and he died in prison. But this man is still at large, and they believe that he is the man who is now harassing Michelle. If you have any information about his identity, you can contact the North Hollywood, California police, and you can do so anonymously. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Barbara Ann Barnes. Viewer discretion is advised. This particular case happened here in Steubenville, Ohio, and it was December 7th, 1995. On that morning, 13-year-old Barbara Ann Barnes was on her way to school. She would walk to school every day. A classmate of hers named Justin Reinhardt would say he saw her that morning. She had been walking quite a bit ahead of him. He saw her every morning. But the thing is Barbara never made it to school. He had seen her sometime around 7:35 a.m. Later, the school would try to call Barbara's mom, but she did not answer the phone. She didn't hear it ringing. They were trying to call her because Barbara didn't show up to school, and so the mom didn't realize she was missing until later that afternoon. When 3 p.m. came and went and Barbara hadn't come home and no one had seen her at school, no one had seen her walking home, she would report her missing. Immediately, a statewide search would begin with police, with volunteers, friends, family, and even the FBI was brought in. But sadly, a couple of months later, on February 22nd, 1996, the body of the 13-year-old girl was found. She had been sexually assaulted and she was strangled. The killer had tried to bury her, but because of some recent rain, it washed away the mud, and that's how she was found. The police and the FBI got a bunch of tips and a bunch of suggestions. One of those tips was actually about Barbara's own uncle, because Barbara's body was found near a property that was in relation to Barbara's uncle's other relative. They even found a shovel on his property that had some fresh mud on it. They collected it, they tested that mud along with the mud where she was buried, and it was not a match, it wasn't the same. They also looked into another man who actually sexually assaulted Barbara's sister, where he would later be convicted of that sexual assault. But they never had any evidence to connect this man to Barbara's murder, just like they never had evidence to connect the uncle to the murder. They also suspected that there was a serial killer going around this area because a few other young girls had been murdered, but they haven't been able to link her to that either. And then another theory is that actually Barbara's father had been shot and killed a little while before this, and his murder is unsolved. And so they thought maybe they're connected somehow, but they don't know who that person is, which means they don't know who this person is. She was so distraught after her father's murder that she avoided strangers. She would never get into a stranger's vehicle. And the belief is that she was abducted on her way to school. And so if that's the case, she likely was forced in the car, or she willingly got in it, meaning she knew who the person was. but to this day, her murder is still unsolved. If you have information, you can contact the Steubenville Police at 740-283-6090. Okay, so apparently the song of the year you were born is supposed to define who you are, I guess. So let's find out. Sorry. It's gonna take a while. Sorry about that. Nearly an entire family is killed, and nobody knows why. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Bolduc family. Viewer discretion is advised. This story happened in the town of Old Orchard Beach, which is in Maine. On February 20th, 2008, firefighters were called to this particular house because it was on fire. Everyone at the fire station knew who lived here. It was the Bolduc family. They were very well known in the community and really well liked. They owned their own little business out there. When they arrived, they put out the fire, and when they enter the home, they find a very grisly discovery. Inside the house is 3 people, and all of them had been murdered. 42-year-old Chris Bolduc, his 42-year-old wife Carol, and Chris's 15-year-old son Josh. It was later determined by the coroner that all of them had been stabbed to death. And this devastated the community. The firefighters who discovered the bodies were in such a state of shock and despair because they knew these people personally. Everybody there did. One person who seemed to become the main suspect, Carol's 21-year-old son, Matthew Cushing. And Carol's vehicle was also missing from the front of the house. It was later discovered somewhere else, and it had blood in the vehicle. The police found out that Matthew Cushing, who did not live with the family, he had his own apartment just off of a college campus, but they found out that he was in town the day of the murders. He was seen by many people. And I believe they had physical evidence in Carol's car that they found later that he had been driving that car. What they came up with was that all 3 members of this family came home at different times that day. 15-year-old Josh entered the house first. He was incapacitated with a stun gun and then stabbed to death. Then Carol came home next. Same thing, incapacitated with a stun gun and then stabbed to death. And then finally, Chris came home again. Stun gun, stabbed to death. Their dog was also killed. Chris was found 2 days later, and he was arrested because he almost immediately confessed to killing the family. However, he never said why he did it. There was speculation that the prosecutors found out that his stepdad, Chris, well, it turns out he may have been allegedly gay and was planning on leaving his wife, Carol. And this made Matthew really pissed off. Another theory is that Matthew wanted to drop out of school and travel abroad, which his mom didn't like. And this caused an argument, which caused him to kill everyone. A third theory is that Carol never told Matthew that Chris wasn't his biological dad, but he grew up thinking he was. And then maybe he found out and reacted. But again, nobody knows why he did it. He would end up pleading guilty and got life in prison without parole. She wanted to collect baby fetuses, and also she built things out of animal bones, and shocker, she's also a murderer. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Brandon Chicklis. Viewer discretion is advised. Brandon Chicklis was born on July 24th, 1997, and he was born and raised in Lowell, Massachusetts. Growing up, he was described as a really kind young man. He was a very hard worker. Brandon loved being outdoors. He loved hiking and camping. He had a few siblings that he was really close with. At one point, he dated this lady here, Julia Enright. The two of them met at a vocational school where they would take the bus together to get there, and they did date briefly. But at the time of this case, they were exes. Julia was a bit of an oddball. So her job was she was a phlebotomist, but she had this really bizarre obsession with blood. Like, she loved blood, and she loved the macabre. She would collect, like, animal bones and animal innards. She would build things out of animal bones. She kept carcasses of roadkill in cages. And these are some of the animal bones that she had collected at her house. One friend of hers would later testify that she tried to go to Planned Parenthood places, and she would try to ask them if she could have some of the aborted baby fetuses. Kind of a red flag, maybe? She also claimed to grave rob and steal skeletons. So at the time this case happened, she's dating this guy here, Jonathan Lind. They had just started dating. And according to her, she wanted to give him a gift. That gift? The body of her ex-boyfriend, Brandon Chicklis. Julia also did some side work as a dominatrix. She had this treehouse near her property where she fitted the walls with, dominatrix gear. On June 23rd, 2018, she lured Brandon Chicklis to this treehouse. And then he was never seen again. He would soon be reported missing by his family. His car also had not been located. A couple weeks later, his car is found in New Hampshire. And then a couple days after that, his body was discovered by a couple of hunters. He had been wrapped in a tarp and he had been stabbed many, many times. Eventually, police were able to track this all down to Julia Enright. They used cell phone data, GPS, also had testimony from friends and acquaintances, witnesses. And initially, she says that she stabbed him in self-defense. She had brought him to the treehouse to have sex with him, but then she changed her mind, and then she claims that he tried to sexually assault her. So she stabbed him in self-defense. When Brandon's body was found just over this railing here in New Hampshire, it was more than evident that this was not self-defense. He had been stabbed so many times. And that's when they discovered all of Julia's very bizarre behavior. Collecting animal bones, wanting to collect baby fetuses. She was obsessed with collecting blood. She dabbled in the occult and ritualistic things. They found her diary where she talked about getting this gift for her new boyfriend. She tried to say that it was a skeleton that she dug up from a graveyard, but it coincided with the day that Brandon was murdered. She also wrote that she had this insatiable desire to kill someone. Again, that diary entry was just a day or so before the murder. But they also found all of these decomposing roadkill animal bodies all over her house in cages. The animal bones that were being built into things. So Julia Enright was arrested and charged with the murder. Eventually she goes on trial. They were hoping for a first-degree murder conviction. However, the prosecution was unable to prove that she had pre-planned this murder. But because she was arguing self-defense, there was a possibility she could be completely acquitted. However, when it was all said and done, the jury went back to deliberate. They found that this was not a planned murder, or there wasn't evidence to show it. But the jury also came to the conclusion that this was not self-defense, that there was more than enough evidence to prove that she deliberately murdered him. And so she was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. Her boyfriend, Jonathan Lind, was arraigned and indicted on charges in connection to this case in 2022. Based on cell phone data and cell phone pings, they uncovered the fact that he was in the location where the body was found on the day the body would have been placed there, the exact location. And they determined that he helped Julia cover up the body with the tarp, move it out of the treehouse, and moved it and dumped it in its location where it was found. So this would be essentially accessory after the fact. He was not charged with the actual murder itself. But as far as I can tell, I think COVID kind of pushed a lot of stuff back. And I don't see anywhere that he's gone to trial or anything like that yet, or there hasn't been a plea agreement or anything. And so hopefully, if he is guilty of all of this, hopefully he is also found accountable for his actions and he's appropriately sentenced. But that is still pending.
As a male hiker, I didn't realize that we had such a poor reputation when it comes to women. I really don't think it's deserved. I mean, are women getting mauled by a bunch of male hikers somewhere?
Hello?
I mean, is there an epidemic of women being attacked in the woods?
Your date of birth, is it yesterday?
GPS, I could help you, if you're lost. If you need, sun protection, I got you.
Is this what gaslighting is?
Almonds, if you got blisters or injured, I got moleskin to help you out.
You're being a douche.
I got some, hand warmers and stuff like that.
Oh.
but you guys would rather run into a bear than me. You know?
Yeah. Obviously. Hello?
I mean, all right.
Okay.
That's fine, I guess.
Yeah. I gotta take a shower after that. Ugh. Listen, I'm a gay man, okay? But even I understand that if I were out by myself walking in the woods and a woman saw me, I'm fully aware that she could very reasonably be very terrified of me. Because you see, a bear is a bear, right? We know what a bear is. We know what a bear will do, right? But just because I say, oh, I'm a good guy, you can trust me. Hi, that's what people like Ted Bundy kind of also sort of said, right? Seemingly nice, charming looking men who can very easily disguise themselves as a good, charming, kind man, but then end up taking you into their vehicle, sexually assaulting you, slitting your throat, and dumping your body in a field somewhere never to be found, or found 35 years later as a skull. I've covered plenty of those here on this true crime page. A lot of men I've covered. A lot of men. I have a whole playlist on this page and the other page, the main page, about men who murder basically women. But you see, if a woman sees a bear and sees a man in this hypothetical situation, the woman's going to know what a bear will do and what a bear is. But that woman will have absolutely no freaking clue who that man is and what that man is capable of doing. Regardless of what you think of yourself or who you are as a person, you could very well be a genuinely amazing human being. But she doesn't know that. I saw somewhere someone post, I can't remember where or who, but they said that even in this hypothetical situation, a man still can't accept the word no. And you still wonder what the issue is? This is the 1-minute case of Casey Boyle. Viewer discretion is advised. Casey Boyle is a 28-year-old veteran who was originally from Ohio, but at the time of this case, he had driven to Fairfax, Virginia. He drove there in his 2017 white Chevy pickup truck. His plate number is JSD3550. Nobody seems to know why he drove to Fairfax. According to a friend of his, he was battling some depression and possible suicidal thoughts. And they had found out that he was arrested the night before he was last seen in Fairfax for trespassing, but I don't know where he was trespassed from. But after that, he just completely vanished. He has not been seen or heard from ever again. It's been nearly a month now. He's 28 years old with brown hair, green eyes. He's 6'3", weighs 220 pounds. His family just wants him home in whatever capacity that may be. If you have information, call 703-691-2131. You can report any information anonymously. So if you know something, please just help his family get him back home. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Claudette Poirier. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Claudette Poirier was just 15 years old, and she was living with her family in Drummondville, which is in Quebec, Canada. In July of 1977, at the end of the month, the family decided to do a little camping trip not too far from their home, and they did so here at Camp Plein Air, this is a more recent, obviously, image of it, but I guess they went camping here often, and it was just a pretty normal experience for them. On the afternoon of July 27th, 1977, Claudette would get on her bicycle from the campsite and go down this particular road to go see a friend. And the friend just lived not too far away. However, Claudette never made it to her friends. Within a couple of days, her abandoned bicycle would be found along this road, but there were still no signs of Claudette. So from what I understand, this is where she started from, like the camp area, and she was supposed to be going this direction, but somehow her bike ends up on the opposite direction. But police had very little evidence to work with. She was reported missing, but they just couldn't find any trace of her. They interviewed family and friends, but they got nothing. Was she a 15-year-old runaway? I mean, that's obviously the first thing they tend to always think, but she had no history of ever doing that. Her case immediately just goes cold, and it stays cold for almost 10 years. So about 15 yards off of a portion of this road where her bike was found, and on the right side of this map here where those little icons are, 2 hunters found a human skull. There were then other scattered bones found around and women's clothing found with them. The remains, from what I can see, I think they said that they were partially charred as if someone tried to burn the body. But using dental records, they were finally able to confirm who the skull belonged to. Sadly, it was 15-year-old Claudette Poirier. They could not determine her cause of death. They did not have her full body, but there was no gunshots or stab wounds on her bones. But they did rule this a homicide. And at this point, her case is still unsolved. It's been almost close to 50 years since she was murdered. And her killer could still be out there. He may be a little bit older, or she, but could very well still be out there. And justice can still be done in this case. So if you have any information about the murder of Claudette Poirier, please contact the RCMP in Quebec, Canada, specifically in Drummondville. That number, if you are in that area, is 819-472-1313. If you can help in any way finally get closure for this case, and for whatever of her family is still out there, answers and justice, please do so. It was a sacrifice to the devil, she said. Okay. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Colleen Slemmer. Viewer discretion is advised. Colleen Slemmer was born in 1975, and she was raised for the most part in Jacksonville, Florida. Colleen was described as a very enthusiastic young girl as she grew up. She always seemed to be in a happy, jovial type mood, always smiling. Colleen would go on to graduate high school sometime around 1994 or so, but unfortunately her parents weren't able to afford to send her to college. And so what she would end up doing is she would enroll, I guess, in something called the Job Corps, a government vocational program. And she did so with the intent of studying something she was really, really into, which was computers. The Job Corps office in Jacksonville, Florida, however, did not have a training program for computers, so she would end up finding one in Knoxville, Tennessee. At this point, she's 19 years old, and I believe she moves into the dorms. This guy here is 18-year-old Daryl Shipp, and he was also at the Job Corps Center there in Knoxville, Tennessee, along with a friend, 19-year-old Shadola Peterson, and to Daryl's sort of girlfriend, Krista Gale Pike. Crystal and to Daryl, they bonded over their fascination with the occult, devil worshipping, satanic worshipping, that kind of thing. I believe Krista even wore jewelry like pentagrams and that kind of thing. So Krista Pike and the other two became, they knew of Colleen Slemmer. Krista began to think and assume that Colleen Slemmer was trying to flirt with her boyfriend to Daryl. And Krista did not like that. That made her mad. However, Colleen Slemmer and Colleen's friends there all said that she definitely was not flirting with him, that she was not interested in him romantically, but Krista didn't believe her. On January 11th, 1995, Krista Pike would tell a friend that she was feeling mean that day, and so she was going to murder Colleen Slemmer. The friend was like, okay, laughed it off and thought nothing of it. If only she had told someone about this. The following night, on January 12th, 1995, near the campus of University of Tennessee, the three of them would lure Colleen into the woods. They brought her to this secluded wooded area. They said, hey, we have some marijuana, we're going to smoke it, and we're just going to basically say no love lost, we forgive and forget. And Colleen agreed, and she went out there. She would never be seen alive again. For the next 45 minutes, Colleen was tortured. She was first attacked and subdued by Daryl. Shadola would serve as the lookout, and Krista Pike would savagely beat her, taunt her, cut her, slashed her throat, and just tortured Colleen for 45 straight minutes. She would later say that whenever she would scream or try to talk, she would hurt her more. She would inflict more pain. And this included cutting her throat pretty deep, But ultimately, what was used to end her life was a piece of brick or something like that, where Krista took it and bashed her over her head, fracturing her skull. It was so severe that portions of her skull literally fell to the ground. And Krista Pike took a piece of the skull and kept it. Then they confirmed she was dead, and they just left her out in the woods. The next day, Krista Pike would be walking around and bragging about the murder. She would show the piece of skull she took to people at the school. She told people that the three of them did this to Colleen as a sacrifice to the devil. And this was more evident because she carved a pentagram into Colleen's chest. No, this is not an actual image of that. Colleen's body was found a day or so after the murder. Police were immediately notified of Krista Pike and the other two who were involved. And Krista Pike, well, she just confessed to police. She told them that this was a bit of jealousy as to why she did it, and also a bit of this was a genuine sacrifice to the devil. She almost seemed proud of it, and she was like almost happy and giddy about it. She was like smiling during all this. So all three of them were arrested and they were charged with their connections to this murder. Shadola Peterson ultimately just got 6 years of probation. Tadaryl Shipp would end up getting life in prison without the possibility of parole. And the 19-year-old girl who was described as having the angel's face but the devil's heart, she was convicted of the murder and she was sentenced to death. She, at that time, became the youngest person in U.S. history to ever get the death penalty. And she cried her way through that sentence. Maybe the devil can save you. Maybe, I don't know. Her lawyers would argue over the years that she had mental health issues, that she should be spared the death penalty. There's like websites and stuff dedicated to, oh, poor you. But the Supreme Court of the United States said, we're not even going to listen to that. She's been denied every time that she's tried to get her sentence reduced. But as of right now, she is actually still awaiting her death sentence. She made a conscious adult decision to torture a young girl. She got what she deserved.
Adults out there that should have been taking care of my son. That somebody was allegedly this man.
Beetlejuice. Hi, Mr. Juice, big fan. That was me who called. Can you please take care of this? Thank you. A camping trip would turn into what some people have called one of America's most disturbing unsolved murders. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Cowden family. Viewer discretion is advised. The Cowden family consisted of 28-year-old Richard and his 22-year-old wife, Belinda. They had 2 children, 5-year-old David and 5-month-old Melissa. They are here pictured at a separate camping excursion, and they love to go camping. It was something they did all the time. The family was originally from White City, Oregon. Richard was a truck driver and Belinda was a stay-at-home mom. It was Labor Day weekend 1974. Richard was actually supposed to be doing a trucking job that weekend, but the truck he was supposed to be driving had broken down, so they had to reschedule. And so because of that, he decided, hey, let's go take a family camping trip since I'll be home. It was a random, unplanned thing. And sadly, it would lead to the murders of all 4 family members. This camping trip would take them to the Siskiyou Mountains. And specifically, they would go to the Rogue River National Forest at the Carberry Picnic Ground. This was the campsite where the family was staying. On September 1st, 1974, Richard and his 5-year-old son would head to the Copper store on foot. They went there to buy a little gallon of milk. After that, they headed back on foot to their campsite, and this is the last time that anybody sees any member of this family alive. That night, the family was actually supposed to go to Belinda's mom's house for dinner before heading back to their home, but they never got to that planned dinner. Belinda's mom, kind of concerned, would go to the campsite where she knew they would be at, and unfortunately, she did not find the family. But what she did find at the campsite on the table was Belinda's purse, and also a half-drunk gallon of milk. Richard's wallet and his watch were just lying on the ground. But nothing else was out of the ordinary there other than the missing family. But I mean, there was no signs of foul play, no blood, no sign of a struggle, no bullets or anything like that. So Belinda's mom would eventually report them missing to police. But police were like, well, we're going to wait 24 hours at least before we do anything. The next day, and this is an actual photo, the family's dog, Droopy, well, he was found scratching on the door of that general store that was not too far from the campsite. The dog was unharmed, but he may have also been the only witness to whatever happened to the Cowden family. As far as I know, the dog was taken in by family and taken care of after that. The state and local police got involved, as well as the Forest Service. The National Guard helped, and there were hundreds of volunteers helping search for the family. They searched on foot through every trail they could look at. They searched in the air with helicopters. They searched the waters nearby, and they came up with nothing. At one point, the police believed, well, the family must have made themselves disappear. The Cowden family had no enemies. There were no jilted exes. They were a very happy couple, very much in love, and their children meant everything to them. They found out that the Cowdens had a little bit of debt, but no more so than anyone else, and they were doing okay. 7 months goes by, and then two men who are hunting in the forest, they come across a tree, and on that tree is what looks like skeletal remains. This was roughly 7 miles from where the Cowdens had been camping. When the authorities arrived, they did notice that the skeletal remains had appeared to have been tied to a tree. 100 feet away was this exact cave. Inside that cave, they found the skeletal remains of another adult and 2 children. This cave has now since been gated off. And then dental records would show that these were the remains of the Cowden family. Belinda and 5-year-old David had both been shot in their head. The 5-month-old baby had blunt force trauma to her skull, and they could not determine how Richard died. But he was tied to a tree and murdered somehow. No gun was found at the scene. They did, however, recover a bullet, and it had been fired from a rifle. According to one person who helped search for the family, this man had gone to that cave and looked in it before the bodies were found and claimed they were not there before. So I don't know exactly what that means. The authorities had nothing to go on. No evidence. Evidence could have easily been destroyed or lost over the course of that 7 months, and they had very, very little to work with. They did have one suspect, a man named Dwayne Lee Little. He had just been released from prison just a couple of months before the Cowdens were murdered. He had sexually assaulted and murdered a teenager back in 1964 and was already released. Witnesses said they saw Dwayne Lee Little purchasing gas within a very short distance from where the Cowdens camped. And according to one jailhouse informant, he confessed to killing the family. He had gone back to prison because he broke parole because his girlfriend turned him in because he had a rifle in his possession. It was not the murder weapon, by the way. However, police have no actual evidence to say he did this. They have no motive. The wallet and the purse left behind, there was no robbery. Could sexual assault have been the motive? Sure. And then he had to kill all the other witnesses. But nobody knows what exactly happened to the Cowden family here at this campsite back in 1974. And this may just go down as yet another terrifying, unsolved murder. They knew who her killer was, but it would take them nearly 40 years to find him. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Cynthia Ruth Wood. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Cynthia Wood was 33 years old. She was the wife to this guy here, Barry, and they had 4 children together. I believe some of them are actually children from his previous marriage. She was a wonderful mom. She was a warm and very inviting person. And at the time of this story, she was working at the Camp Vista Daycare Center as a teacher. Cynthia Wood was last seen around June 6, 1984, and she was seen leaving her home. But when she never arrived back home at all, she would be reported missing. 5 days later, I know it's kind of dark, but her body was found here in a ditch off the side of a road. And this, by the way, is in Riverview, Florida. Cynthia had been strangled to death. And it would not take long for police to really know who did this. Cynthia had been seen last with this man here, Donald Santini. Allegedly, he had asked Cynthia out on a date. He actually met her at the daycare center where she worked. And from what I understand, there was physical evidence with her body where they dusted for fingerprints and it actually matched prints that they had for him already in their records. But he was already on the run. Another sign of guilt. He instantly became a wanted fugitive. They believe that at one point he may have gotten to Texas and changed his name. He was featured on America's Most Wanted several times over the decades, and it would be nearly 40 years before they finally found out where he was. A tip in the San Diego, California area led police to where he was. And so now Donald Santini, now 65 years old, was arrested by U.S. Marshals. And then the police from Florida will go all the way out there to question him. Oh, okay, someone's chipper to be arrested for murder. Donald Santini would basically end up just pleading guilty to the murder. And so at his sentencing here, I swear to God, he looks like he's about ready to break into a "My name is Donald Santini and I have diabetes" kind of commercial, you know what I mean? He looks like a deflated walrus. Anyway, he pleads guilty to the first-degree murder. Why are you crying, champ? Suck it up. I'm sure nobody's going to want to play with your butt in prison. But he would be sentenced to 50 years in prison, followed by 15 years of probation. But at the age of 65, he won't be getting out of prison. He got to live 40 extra years, free as a bird, for killing a woman. And all because, essentially, she turned down his advances. And well, he seemed like such a nice guy. You know what, at this point, women should just seek out the bear in order to protect them from men. Yeah. Her boyfriend's 5-year-old son sat just outside as she brutally murdered an elderly woman. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Dana Sue Gray. Viewer discretion is advised. Dana Sue Gray was born in 1957. By an early age, she began to act out a lot towards her mom, and she would begin stealing, and she would have these violent outbursts, especially as a child going into her teenage years. Before her mother ended up passing away from breast cancer, she had a very, bad relationship with her. She had a lot of resentment towards her mom. Eventually, Dana would become a nurse because she found it interesting as nurses were working on her mom during her cancer. Eventually, she got married to a man named Tom Gray, but their marriage would end poorly. She had started dating another man who had a young son already. She also began to become bankrupt, and she was having some extreme money issues. She loved to spend money, a lot of it, and it created a massive amount of debt. In and around the affluent neighborhood of Canyon Lake, California, a series of murders of elderly women would begin. In February of 1994, an elderly woman named Norma Davis, she was found brutally murdered inside of her home. When she was found a couple of days later, she had a fillet knife sticking out of her body. Actually, two. She had one sticking out of her chest and one protruding out of her neck. She was 86 years old. 2 weeks later, a 66-year-old woman named June Roberts was found murdered. When she was found in her home, she had a telephone cord wrapped around her neck, and she had been strangled with it. All of her money and credit cards were stolen, just like with the first victim. I think I forgot to mention that. And then it happened again in March of 1994. A woman named Dora Beebe was found murdered inside her home. She had been beaten to death with a clothes iron. Her skull had been fractured, and her credit cards and cash were all stolen. On March 10th, 1994, a woman fitting this description walked into an antique store where a woman named Dorinda Hawkins was working. Well, this woman walks up behind Dorinda and begins to strangle her from behind. Dorinda collapses, and the would-be killer thought she was dead. She wasn't. Luckily, she came to, she contacted police, and she also informed them that her credit cards and cash were stolen. She gave a description of her killer, which led to this composite. Well, police were able to trace the credit card purchases that were made from all of these stolen credit cards from these murder scenes and attempted murder scene, because all of the stolen cards had been maxed out. They interviewed a bunch of people who worked at retail stores, and when police showed them this sketch, they all said, yeah, that's her. This led them to Dana Sue Gray. So, it turns out Dana Sue Gray, like I mentioned earlier, was having some extreme money issues, but she really loved to spend money. She was addicted to shopping. She loved to spend lavishly, but she didn't have her own money to do it. She figured, well, old people do, and this community, this affluent neighborhood, well, it has a lot of older people. She attacked women who she found out lived alone, and she did so because she needed to fulfill her urge to spend money by using their stolen money after she murdered them. Dana Sue Gray also was battling alcoholism, and she was addicted to drugs. She had been going downhill for a very long time. They discovered by interviewing people in her life that she was dating a man, and that man had a 5-year-old son. Dana, according to this 5-year-old, would bring him along on car rides. And they determined that he was in the car waiting outside of these homes that she would somehow weasel her way into while she went inside to brutally murder these old women and steal their money, and then she took the little boy on these shopping sprees. Unbelievable. They also connected Dana Sue Gray to the first crime scene with a shoe impression. She left behind other pieces of evidence that linked her to the crime scenes physically, but also she had in possession stolen credit cards. She was seen and identified using the stolen credit cards, and the motive ultimately was a financial motive. But also she had a very strange relationship with her late mother, and there was kind of like that psychological element to her motive as well. She used the resentment she had towards her mom and to attack these older women and then steal their money. So it was multiple motives involved here. Prosecutors told her, look, we're going for the death penalty. If we convict you, we're gonna fight to have you executed. And with that, she decides to take a plea deal. She ends up pleading guilty to multiple homicides and, not to mention, robbery and whatnot, other minor charges. And she is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She will never see the light of day again. Murdered in an elevator, and the question is, who done it? Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of David Merrifield. Viewer discretion is advised. It was February 9th, 1995 in Dallas, Texas at approximately 7 a.m. Attorney Clint Blackman enters the building in preparation for his day. The elevator in the building is notorious for being super slow, so he elects to use the stairs. At approximately 7:30 a.m., 2 more employees enter the building. They elect to use the elevator and not the stairs. When they open the elevator, this is a recreation from Unsolved Mysteries, but there is a body, and there is blood beneath him. They scream, and Clint Blackman runs down the stairs to see what's going on, and when he looks at the body, he knows who it is. His colleague and fellow attorney, David Merrifield. David specialized in real estate law. He was a father to 2 children, and he had just recently married someone and had only been married for about 3 months. When police arrive, they do discern that he had been shot once in the back of his head, and it appeared to be at close range, execution style. Whoever did it left no trace of themselves behind, no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. There were also no cameras in the building, so they don't know who it was that entered. David was a very unassuming guy. He didn't really get into any kind of trouble. And at first, they just was this a robbery gone wrong? I mean, his wallet was missing, but just a few hours later, they found his wallet down the street, and all of the money inside, credit cards, all of it was still there. Nothing was taken, and no fingerprints were on it. Was David the intended victim? But why? Police interviewed his secretary. She said, I guess the day prior, David had received 4 phone calls from a man calling himself Sam Jones. She thought that this was some kind of solicitation type thing, but David eventually took the call. And the day of his murder, they noticed that on his calendar, he had an appointment at 6:30 a.m. with this Sam Jones person. Nobody there knew who that was. This was likely a fake name. And also, David was someone who never came in this early unless he absolutely had to. Sam Jones, this person, never called back ever again, which to police was like, okay, if David missed the appointment or whatever with his name being out there, he's never called back. He's never called the police to say, hey, that's me. They believe this Sam Jones person, whoever that may be, is his killer. And why was David specifically targeted? Why was he shot and killed execution style? What led to this? Why was this planned? So the only update I have is that in 2007, police state that a man has ended his own life, and this man was the suspect in this homicide, but they have never named him publicly. They've never announced why he did it. or how they know it was him. But the Dallas police still have this case as open. Within just a few moments, a brutal death would occur in one of the worst freak accidents. Viewer discretion is advised. This story occurred at a business called Timmins Waste Services, which was located in Wolverhampton in England. One of the workers there was this man here, 29-year-old David Willis. He had been working there for about 8 years or so. And this was one of his managers, a man named Brian Timmins. What I'm about to show you is the actual CCTV footage of the event, but I just want to tell you there's absolutely nothing graphic shown. You do not see anything violent, no blood, no gore. Honestly, it's really grainy and you really can't make much out, but this is what happened. So the day in question is September 15th, 2018. Brian Timmins is operating this machine here. Then you can see him lifting David Willis, I guess on the arm of this machine, on top of this shredder, this big industrial shredding machine, and that there was a jam that had happened inside that machine. David Willis was going to go in there to clear up the blockage, but for whatever reason, the shredding machine was not turned off. You see David Willis go into the machine, but you never see him come out of it. And David Willis is literally never seen ever again. Later, you can actually see Mr. Timmins, Brian Timmins, who peeps in there. He's like trying to see if we can find him in there. Then you can actually see Mr. Timmins just sort of wandering the grounds of the place, apparently looking for him, for David Willis. Obviously, he does not find him. I guess at one point, he actually tries calling David Willis's phone to see if maybe, hey, where'd you go? Like, you just disappeared. Yeah, no shit. He then continues to operate the machine and continues to put things in the shredding machine that is now still working and running. The last place that David Willis was ever seen going into is the shredding machine that this man is now continuing to use. You can see him later just sort of chilling and like he just thinks the guy walked off the property. But the reality is that David Willis, he fell completely into the shredding machine that was still running when he went inside, and it completely, it pulverized him. It destroyed him. They believe that he was dead within a matter of seconds. So this wasn't a super slow or painful death, hopefully. But David Willis has never been found. Because he continued to use the machine, Mr. Timmins, it just piled up whatever his body may have been. It got mixed in with all of the rest of the waste, which was then disposed of. The company got convicted of corporate manslaughter and was fined £400,000. He was convicted of manslaughter and got 7.5 years. In East Liverpool, Ohio, there is currently a missing and endangered child. Hello, true crimerers. This is the missing persons case of Ericka Heaton. Viewer discretion is advised. There really isn't much information in terms of the circumstances of her disappearance, but Ericka Heaton is just 15 years old, and she is from East Liverpool, which I guess is also the St. Clair Township area of Ohio. She was last seen on May 9th, 2024, wearing black shorts, a black hoodie with butterflies on it. She was also carrying an orange backpack with black straps. She is 5'8" with long brown hair, and she has brown eyes. One article said she was last seen on Lois Lane, but then another said she was last seen on Grimsbridge Road. I don't know if that's like a cross-section or what. If you have information, please call 330-385-1234. The police have stated that they are concerned for Ericka's safety, and this might be an endangered person situation. So please, if you have any information or know where she is, please do not hesitate to call. Hello, true crimerers. I wanted to provide a really quick update on a missing teenager that I posted about just the other day. 15-year-old Ericka Heaton, who was last seen on May 9th, 2024, has been officially located and she is safe. She was found in Beaver County, Pennsylvania, and what this article says is that charges have actually been filed against her. And I guess it's charged as an unruly juvenile. And police have said there may be further charges coming, not only against her, but possibly other people. But as of right now, they only have one charge against her. I don't know the circumstances. I don't know, where she was as of me filming this on May 16th, 2024. It's not my business. It's not anyone's business, but the families. The only thing that really should pertain and matter to us is that this child was found. She is alive and she is safe. And in the end, that is the most important thing. An elderly man was just trying to protect his wife, and he died for it. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Elvis Johnson. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred here in Chandler, Arizona, which is in sort of my neck of the woods. 84-year-old Elvis Johnson and his wife Vivian had been together for 65 years. He was a veteran of the U.S. military. He fought in wars. He and Vivian would go on to have several wonderful children together, and they lived a life of pure happiness and genuine love for one another. By the age of 84, Elvis had already had a heart attack and I think a stroke, but he still remained very active. He loved to go golfing multiple times a week with his wife. But on a cool evening in 2003, all of that would end. Summers around 5 p.m. on October 21st, 2003, Elvis and Vivian would go to this Home Depot just to purchase a couple plants for their house. They did some shopping for a little bit. They actually parked, I think, somewhere on the side of the building. And at 5:20 p.m., they walked out of the Home Depot. They walked to their vehicle when a man fitting this description here came up to them and asked them if they had jumper cables that he could use. Vivian told him very politely, "Unfortunately, we don't have any. I'm so sorry." And that's when this man just grabbed Vivian's purse and began to run. 84-year-old Elvis was like, "No, you're not." He chased after him to get that purse back. But he wasn't fast enough, and the other guy managed to get into his vehicle. And so in the parking lot, the guy, he backed up, and he actually ended up bumping both Vivian and Elvis, knocking them both to the ground. Vivian hit her head on the concrete, but she was okay. Elvis gets up, and he begins to basically chase after this guy in the car, because now you just hurt his wife, and that's not going to stand with him. But this assailant in the vehicle backed over Elvis and ran him over and literally dragged Elvis along the pavement of the parking lot until finally Elvis's his body let go from the bottom of the vehicle and the guy sped away. Unfortunately, Elvis Johnson would be pronounced dead. Vivian was taken to the hospital where she was treated for her injuries, but she would end up being okay. This is a composite drawing of the suspect. Back in 2003, he was described as a Hispanic man in his early 30s, about 5'7", maybe 5'8", with medium build, and he was driving a late model Toyota Corolla or something similar. It had tinted windows and it already had extensive damage on the vehicle. But this man has never been caught. And police in Chandler are still hoping someone knows who this man is, because he took this man away from the world, and all he was trying to do was protect his wife. If you have information, please contact the police in Chandler at 480-782-4130. A 9-year-old girl would find her mother brutally murdered inside her bedroom, and to this day they are still wondering who done it. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Evelyn Colon. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Evelyn Colon was a 28-year-old mother living in Norwalk, Connecticut. By the way, if you look up this case, there is actually another Evelyn Colon who was also murdered, but there is no connection between these two. It was August 23rd, 1990. A 9-year-old girl runs across the street to a neighbor's house to call 911. This is because the 9-year-old girl walked into her mom's bedroom after hearing the sounds of screams, and she found her mom bloodied and not moving. She tried using the phone in her mom's room to call 911, but someone cut the lines to the phones. When police arrived to the home located on 331 Ellie Avenue in Norwalk, they find Evelyn Colon, and she is pronounced dead at the scene. Evelyn appears to have been beaten with her own phone, which was one of those big ones that had like an answering machine as part of it. Evelyn had also been shot twice. There was no forced entry into the home. As a matter of fact, it's believed that she didn't even lock her front door that night, and the back door had an issue where it didn't close all the way. When police canvassed the neighborhood, they said they saw a man, a black male between 18 to 22 years old, 6 feet tall. He was thin, wearing a white painter's hat, running from Evelyn's house. He did not fit the description to anyone that Evelyn had ever dated. And it just doesn't sound like anybody actually recognized him. They also don't even know if this is the actual killer or not. During their search of the home, they didn't really find a lot of evidence. There really wasn't any additional DNA left behind, like any extra blood that was left from the killer. They have dusted for fingerprints, but to my knowledge, they don't have any. It's now over 30 years later, and there is a cold case detective who recently reopened the case, and they're hoping against hope that they can get DNA from something at the crime scene. They still have the phone that was used to beat her, and it's possible they can get some kind of DNA off of it. Now that technology is crazily advanced, you can do that. Not to mention other pieces of evidence that they can likely find something from. I don't believe the gun was found at the house, and sadly, Evelyn's case is still, to this day, unsolved. They've looked into her life. There wasn't anyone that they could come up with. Like no enemies or jilted exes, no coworkers that maybe she had issues with. I don't know about the father to the children. I'm assuming they've looked into him and cleared him, but I don't know. But somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have information, please call 203-854-3164. Help Evelyn get her justice. Oh, thank God I'm not actually on the ride this time. All right. Bye. Have fun. I won't be on it this time. Sorry. Holy shit, I'm suddenly on the ride. How did this happen? This is magic. Well, it is called Excalibur, so I guess maybe it is kind of magic, but I don't like being teleported to places. What is this? Why am I... Is this the start of the ride? Or is it over? Is it done? Okay, well... It's exciting, huh? I said, huh? Excite? Jesus. One day we'll be up the hill. This music kind of slaps, right? Slaps. I heard that in the movie once. Right? There's no one there. Jesus, we're still going up, huh? Okay. So, do any good blow lately? Never mind, sorry. Sorry, I had to stop. The excitement was just too much excitement. So anyway, this is another Deaths at Theme Parks. Viewer discretion is advised. So today's video takes us to Astroworld, Six Flags. I don't know why I said that backwards. Astroworld opened in 1968, but it closed in 2005. The ride in question, Excalibur. Wow, that definitely screams Excalibur, huh? Like the set, just such great artwork and everything. This particular incident happened on August 9th, 1997. A 51-year-old maintenance worker who did the maintenance for this particular ride and a couple others. Well, on this day, he, I guess, saw an all clear signal, and there was something wrong with that. Something was wrong with the system. So he would go out and he would get up on top of the tracks. And as he is working on it, somebody else starts a test run of the ride. And the worker is in a place where he can't just easily, get off. As you can kind of see here, there really isn't much, there's no room on this. There's, no staircase or anything. And so the train, during its test run, the worker saw it far too late, and it just struck him head on. And it was at its top speed. He was struck by this giant train, and he was thrown from the tracks. And I believe he was killed instantly. I don't really see anything with regards to lawsuits, or if anyone was held responsible for it, or if this was just yet another death at a theme park where nobody really takes accountability, because that happens a lot. And just a few, excuse me? And not but a few years after the incident, Six Flags Astroworld closed forever. Just like your mouth should be closed, sir.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one overseas.
Who's your favorite serial killer? I get that question all the time, and the only appropriate answer to that question is, no one is my favorite serial killer. You shouldn't have one of those. You shouldn't. If you have a favorite serial killer, you might need to be checked up here. That being said, when people ask me that question, I do always have this response. The serial killer that I find to be the most terrifying and the most, I guess, fascinating is this man here, Paul Michael Stefani, also known as the Weepy-voiced killer. When I first heard his 911 calls, I'm pretty sure I had nightmares. So real quickly, I've talked about him before on this page many years ago. Paul Michael Stefani had murdered 3 women and attempted to kill 2 more. After each attack, each murder, he would call 911 to report himself. He would always call crying and whining, and I've always wondered if that was real. I mean, the calls were real, but was he just feigning this crybaby thing, or was he actually crying? Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I didn't mean to stab her with an ice pick. See how there's no tears coming out? Like, it sounds fake. Sounds like he's faking it. But at any rate, here are his 911 calls. Good luck sleeping.
Don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it. Don't know why I had to stab her. I am so upset about it. I keep getting drunk every day. I can't believe it. It's just like a big dream. I can't think of being locked up. If I get locked up, I'll kill myself. I'd rather kill myself than get locked up. I'll try not to kill anybody else.
Fire emergency.
Please don't talk, just listen. I'm sorry I killed that girl. I stabbed her 40 times. Kimberly Compton was the first one. Oh, my God. I don't know what's the matter with me. I'm sick. I'm going to kill myself, I think.
Where are you?
I'm just going to... If somebody dies with a red shirt on, it's me. I killed both of them. I'm sorry. I'll never make it to heaven.
Calm down. Calm.
Finally, I just stabbed somebody with an ice pick. I can't stop myself. I keep killing somebody. Yes, please. This is an emergency. Please send a squad to Pierce Butler Road, Molenberg Manufacturing Company, machine shop. Please, there's an ambulance too. There's a girl hurt there.
Can you tell me what happened?
She was beaten to death with a cinder block, and nobody knows who did it. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Frances Bemis. Viewer discretion is advised. Frances Bemis had a pretty busy life. She had gone to college in Georgia and also in California. She then became a department store public relations executive and also a fashion consultant. After she retired from that, she found herself in St. Augustine, Florida, and she owned the Maria Sanchez Apartments. Frances was a member of the Humane Society, she was a part of the local art association, and she also was a very vocal person when it came to human rights. And she was an activist for the Black community there in Florida. On November 3rd, 1974, the 70-year-old woman would take her nightly walk around St. Augustine, but on this particular occasion, she would not come home. Armed only with a flashlight, she always felt safe in this neighborhood. But the morning after, police were called because they found Frances's body. She was found just by this vacant lot near some just piles of dirt. And it was more than obvious that she had been bludgeoned over the head with a small cinder block. And she was beat several times. And she had been partially set on fire. It's honestly kind of unbelievable that nobody discovered this until the following morning. Allegedly, sometime around 7 p.m. the night that Frances would have been attacked, there were some people who called the police saying they heard some loud noises and the sounds of someone choking. Police allegedly went out, but they didn't find anything. So who knows if they even went to the right spot. Well, police then find out that, coincidentally, Frances was very good friends with a woman named Athalia Lindsley. Athalia had been found brutally murdered on the steps of her home just a few months prior to Frances's murder. Frances was very vocal about who she thought did it, and then she ends up dead herself. Eventually, Athalia's next-door neighbor was arrested and charged with her murder, and I don't believe they found any connection with him to Frances. Frances was just this sort of sweet, unassuming old lady. She didn't get involved in anything nefarious, and this may have just been an extremely random chance encounter she had. and she was just murdered by a random assailant. But who that person is, they have never found out. This happened in 1974. It's been almost 50 years. Whoever killed her is obviously very old now or possibly dead. Hopefully they're still alive. I don't know if they've tried pulling DNA from certain things or not, but if you have any information, you can call 888-277-8477. Would be his feet that finally did him in. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Gary Dale Larson. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in 1986 in Edmond, Oklahoma. Gary Dale Larson lived here in this home, and at the time of this case, he had a girlfriend named Janet. It was August 16th, 1986. 28-year-old Gary Larson and his girlfriend were getting ready for bed. His girlfriend took a shower while he began to fall asleep. A couple of hours or so after they fell asleep, they were suddenly awoke by a loud thump coming from the living room. Gary would get out of bed, tell his girlfriend to please wait there, he's gonna go check on the noise. Within like a minute of him leaving the bedroom, his girlfriend hears the sound of a struggle. She runs down the hallway and she sees a man who is barefoot and only wearing underwear, hunched over Gary and stabbing him. She would later give a description that looked like this. The man then kidnapped the girlfriend, Janet, and forced her into the bedroom. And for the next hour or so, he would repeatedly sexually assault her and threatened to kill her. But for whatever reason, he decided to let her live, and he escaped the home, and then Janet called the police. Gary was found here in the hallway, dining room, kind of kitchen area, and he had been stabbed to death. This attack on Gary was vicious, and there was blood everywhere. There was also this oval-shaped indent, you can see the crack in the wall, where Gary had been thrown into. At first, the police weren't really believing the girlfriends that this guy was only in his underwear. They said it didn't make sense, and that someone would have seen this guy covered in blood running from the house. So they actually really kind of interrogated her for some time. But eventually, after looking thoroughly into the house and collecting evidence, they realized that she was definitely telling the truth. First of all, the screen door had been cut open, and this window stared directly at the bathroom door. There was actually an impression underneath that windowsill that looked as if someone was sitting. These were like literally someone's butt prints, but it was like their underwear. Again, proving that this guy was in his underwear. But they believed that he had been sitting out the window and had watched the girlfriend take a shower, and that she was the main target, and maybe he didn't realize that Gary was there. They also found several foot impressions inside the house. Some were bloody impressions, some they had picked up after spraying some luminol, and they were extremely clear foot impressions. Definitely not Gary's, and definitely not the girlfriend's. This was a peeping Tom that turned into a murderer and a rapist. They had people they questioned in the neighborhood, they had suspects, but none of them matched the forensic evidence they had. And so this case goes cold for about 18 years. And then it almost happens again. Fast forward now to 2004. This man would call police because he caught a peeping Tom outside of his house watching his teenage daughter. And this, by the way, is in the exact same neighborhood. This was Gary's house, and this was like across the street is where this other neighbor lived. But the man whose daughter was being spied on basically was able to apprehend this guy himself. This man was wearing all black. He had cut eye holes in his turtleneck and had pulled it above his head. But yeah, he was sitting right outside the bedroom window just being a total creeper. Something else that caught police's attention was that this man was barefoot. Something very unusual. And it struck a chord in the investigators because they realized nearly 20 years prior, there was a murder from a peeping Tom where the guy was barefoot. This man was 38-year-old Jonathan Scott Graham, and he was a piece of human garbage. This was him back in 1986. He lived in the neighborhood back then. As a matter of fact, he pretty much lived on the same street. They found out that after the murder of Gary Larson, he had joined the U.S. Army, and then he eventually came back home. When he was arrested in 2004, they found what they would call a rape kit in his vehicle. But they were more concerned about his feet, and so they took impressions of his feet. They were identical. They were the exact same footprints that was left behind at the murder scene of Gary Larson. They also took his DNA because they had done a rape test on Janet from the original case, and he was a match to that kit. He was the man who killed Gary Larson and sexually assaulted Janet, his girlfriend, for hours. So, he was charged with first-degree murder. He was convicted and got 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Good luck peeping on people in prison, bud. That won't go well for you. Okay, so this turns you into a Harry Potter character, and like with every filter, I'm sure this will be wonderfully flattering. So let's find out. Oh, God. Jesus. Oh, Avada Kedavra! Immediately, Avada Kedavra, Avada Kedavra, Avada Kedavra. Beetlejuice? I don't... Jesus! Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Henok Woldu. Viewer discretion is advised. This is one of those cases where, unfortunately, there is not a lot of detail. But it was Christmas Eve 2015. Phoenix, Arizona police are called about shots fired here at Willow Springs Apartments, which is located on 27th Avenue and Indian School Road. The shots were heard at about 4:32 a.m. that morning. When police arrived, they find a man who had been shot to death inside his vehicle in the parking lot of the apartments. I have no information on Henok Woldu. I don't even know if that's exactly how it's pronounced. I cannot find any news clips, any newspaper clips. I can't even find his obituary or anything. Witnesses said they saw 2 black males and a black female get into an SUV just after the shooting occurred and sped away. It wouldn't be until about 2022 or 2023 when police found out who was responsible. I don't have a photo of the killer either. I have been scouring the internet looking through like Arizona inmate records. I can't find this guy anywhere. But Phoenix police arrested a man named Antoine Lamar Jones. He already had multiple charges from Maricopa County, including like robbery, disorderly conduct, assault, and he was a pimp. Police would get information from a couple of sex workers that essentially that morning Henok Woldu had picked up 2 sex workers. They offered to like do a double date with him, but he declined and he dropped them off at the apartment complex. That's when Antoine Jones walked up to him and fired several rounds into him and then stole his wallet, stole money off of him. Allegedly, Henok Woldu was a John that had been, I guess, had used these services a couple of times, and Antoine Lamar Jones was essentially, wasn't getting paid by Mr. Woldu. And so the reason for the murder, he said, was because he wasn't getting paid, so he shot and killed him and stole the money he had. So Antoine Lamar Jones eventually goes on trial, and he is convicted of his murder. At his sentencing hearing the first time, well, it became completely belligerent in the courtroom. He and his family were throwing around a ton of obscenities. They were being physical. They were resisting detention officers. It was a nightmare. So they had to come back at a later date where he was now more calm. And Antoine Lamar Jones was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He also got 35 additional years for the other charges, including robbery. I wish I could show you his murderous face. A man confessed to a murder while on his deathbed. Well, by golly gum, that was kind of him. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Iris Brown. Viewer discretion is advised. Iris Leslie Brown was born on May 26, 1948. At the time of this case, she was 27 years old and living in Burlington, Vermont. On March 15, 1976, she was observed walking out of her apartment with an acquaintance of hers, a man named William John Posey Jr. That is quite a mustache you got there, bud. But after seen leaving with him, Iris was never seen again by anyone. When she was reported missing, police found out about William Posey, who had a criminal history of fraud and other things related to stealing, at one point wanted by the FBI. What he says happened is that he went to her apartment because he received a telegram from Iris's boyfriend, who was at that time in prison. Well, the telegram said that the boyfriend, who was in a prison in Connecticut, was going to be released. So William said he would drive Iris to go get him. But then what he tells police is they only made it as far as Massachusetts, and he just left her in the city of Springfield there because I guess they found out that the boyfriend wasn't actually getting released, and so he just left her there. Well, after a year or so of investigating this and never finding a single trace of Iris, William John Posey Jr. was arrested and charged with kidnapping her. But because she was never found and no one had ever seen her, because there was no body, they couldn't charge him with murder because they didn't know she was dead or not. At one point, he also became a suspect in the disappearance of this young woman, Judy Martins, from Ohio, but there was never any evidence to connect him to it. However, in 1978, a woman named Judith Ann Bishop from Illinois, well, I guess there was evidence to show that he had actually killed her. And he would be arrested in Texas for that particular murder. He was then extradited back to Illinois where he would go on trial, and he was convicted. But even at that point, still, there's no body for Iris Brown. So all they can do is charge him with kidnapping. They did find, I guess, some tiny droplets of blood in his vehicle, but they can only say it was the same blood type as Iris, because that's all they could do at the time. At any rate, he was found guilty of her kidnapping, and he was sentenced to life in prison. So the guy was never getting out of jail ever again. But it wouldn't be until 2008, when he is dying in a prison cell, where he would confess that he actually killed Iris Brown, and they never left Vermont. He tried to get her to sell cocaine with him. She refused, and they argued, and so he murdered her. He only has a vague idea of where her body is, and to this day, they've never found it. He died in 2008. Call me a hypocrite, but this is a true crime case where the alleged murderer should not have spent a single second in a prison cell. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jeremiah Berry. Viewer discretion is advised. I don't really have a lot of detailed information about him, but Jeremiah Berry was born on August 8th, 1987, and he was born in Silver City, New Mexico. I believe he was one of 5 total siblings, and his parents, at the time this case happened, had been separated for quite some time. I actually don't have a photo of the victim in this case, and quite honestly, for the first time, I don't care that I don't. Jeremiah had spent his entire life, his entire youth, being abused by his father, Jack. His dad physically abused him, emotionally abused him, and repeatedly sexually abused him. I don't know all of the circumstances, but I know at the time this case happened in 2008, it sounds like Jeremiah was still living with his dad. And Jeremiah was like 20 or 21 years old. On February 19th, 2008, Jack Berry, Jeremiah's 42-year-old father, would rape Jeremiah once again. Jack Berry had also told Jeremiah that it's in God's plan for him to get a sex change operation so that Jeremiah could become his new wife. His father had raped him so many times that he attempted to end his own life many, many times. I don't know all the family dynamics. I don't know, where the mom was at this time. I just know on that February day in 2008, he was sexually assaulted by his dad and he was done. So he took a gun, Jeremiah did, put it to the back of his father's head, and he pulled the trigger, putting a bullet through his head and killing him. He then took an axe and he dismembered his father's body. He fed parts of his dad's dismembered body to coyotes. Police really only ever found like a skull and a couple other body parts. Jeremiah would be arrested, I think, a few months later and charged with this murder. But once all the information came out about the constant abuse, the rapes, they would essentially let him take a plea deal in which he was sentenced to a grand total of 3 years in prison, but also got credit for time already served, which was over a year. And then he would have to have 10 years of probation after that. The judge said, listen, I have to give you some jail time just because of the actions, but I'm giving you the least I can possibly give you. Jeremiah was eventually released, but he never had a chance at a life. And on March 2nd, 2012, at the age of 24, Jeremiah took his own life. He just never had a chance.
How much alcohol is safe for human consumption?
7. Right? Carry the 1, add the whiskey. Yeah. 7 alcohols? This discovery would help bring some answers to a 45-year-old mystery. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Kyle Clinkscales. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this story, Kyle Clinkscales was a 22-year-old college student. He was attending Auburn University, and that's in Auburn, Alabama. He was originally from LaGrange, Georgia, and that is where he was on the night of January 27th, 1976. He had been at a local establishment called the Moose Club, and he was seen getting into his vehicle and leaving, and then after that, he was never seen again. He was supposed to see his parents, I guess, the following Friday, but for them, that Friday never came. The 22-year-old man was last seen in his white Ford Pinto, but he never got back to his school, which was where he was supposed to be heading. He was never seen or heard from ever again. Police in LaGrange, Georgia, over the years, they had continually investigated this case. They had looked at it as a potential murder case for quite some time. Kyle's dad would actually end up writing this book called Friday Never Came. One man was actually arrested in connection with this case, Jimmy Earl Jones. Like James Earl Jones? Well, he apparently went to police and said he knows what happened to him, that Kyle had been shot and killed. He was shot and killed by somebody else. Except, Jimmy here kept changing his story. He changed it over and over again. And eventually, police were like, we're done with this dude. He's hindering this investigation. And so they arrest him and charge him with charges related to hindering a police investigation. He ends up getting convicted and serving several years for it. But ultimately, his information never actually led to anything about where Kyle Clinkscales was or what happened to him. Fast forward 45 years, in December of 2021, police in LaGrange, Georgia are given a 911 call that a vehicle has been found submerged in this creek. They pull the vehicle out and they determine that it was at one point a white Ford Pinto. You could still see the license plate and the tags, and they would confirm that this was Kyle Clinkscales' Ford Pinto. When they pulled the vehicle from the water, they did also discover his wallet, his ID, and there were skeletal remains inside. It would take another year for the remains to finally be identified as the 22-year-old missing man. However, a coroner could not determine how he died. And there is probably no chance they will ever know, because his bones had been submerged in the water for God knows how long, maybe 45 full years. They don't have signs of foul play. They also can't say for certain this was an accident. And unless someone comes forward with real information, they'll probably never know exactly what happened to Kyle Clinkscales. Sadly, his parents both passed away before he was found. They never knew. There is a missing child from Colorado Springs, Colorado. Hello, true crimeers. This is the missing persons case of Leah Black. Viewer discretion is advised. Leah Black is a 15-year-old indigenous young girl from Colorado Springs, Colorado. According to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, she was last seen near Constitution Avenue and Mark Sheffel Road in Colorado Springs, and that was just this past Wednesday night, May 15th, 2024. There really doesn't seem to be much information with regards to the circumstances of her disappearance, but Leah Black is indigenous. She is 5 feet 8 inches tall, approximately 130 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing black pajama pants, a black hoodie, and white Crocs. If you have any information and you are local to the area, the CBI has said you can call 911. Or you can call 719-444-7000. If you have any information at all about where she is, please call them immediately. You can remain anonymous if you need to. You don't have to say who you are. You just have to say what you know. And hopefully, Leah Black can be brought home safe. Extreme Racers! Here we go, baby. I'm so excited for this ride. Hi. Hello. Does that guy have a gun? Oh, it's like a tool for fixing things. I'm sorry. I'm just so getting ahead of myself. This ride is going to be extreme. Okay, here we go. Oh, we're actually going up the hill fast. Like other rides are like super hella slow. You know what I mean? This is bordering on kind of extreme. You know what I mean? You're not very talkative. That's fine. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Hands up. Maybe. Yep. Up. Going down the hill. Woo! Lights! Were the lights the extreme part? Shit, I almost missed it. Okay. Okay. Where does the extreme part located and how do we get to it? Alright. Well, might as well start doing my taxes while we're up here. So, do you need a needle to be thread at all? No? Okay, you're having fun? Okay. Shut the fuck up! I'm meditating. I'm just gonna stretch it out real quick, because this is not really any kind of danger at all, so, you know. Woo! Is it so extreme that we've missed how extreme it is? You know what I mean? Like a time loop sort of thing? Okay. Excuse me. This is another Deaths at Theme Parks. Viewer discretion is advised. This happened in Legoland Billund, which is in Denmark. You know, I used to live next to one of the original Legolands, which was in Carlsbad, California. I lived like 10 minutes away from it. Never been. Don't go barefoot, you know what I mean? That was stupid, Mike. That was an idiotic joke. So this ride here is called the Extreme Racers. It zigs and zags at record medium to low speeds. Maybe you just have to have been there. In 2007, this is not the same ride that I was just on. In 2007, an employee of this particular Legoland park was asked to retrieve a wallet from that fell off one of the riders during the ride. Unfortunately, this employee decided to climb over a restricted area fence and did so while another round of the ride was going. When the employee crawled down to reach the wallet, it happened to coincide with one of the times the coaster had gone into one of the lower areas. And unfortunately, the coaster train struck the employee and killed him instantly. This kind of thing has happened before. Never do that. Like a ghost, he entered the home, and to this day, he's never been caught. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Leota Camp. Viewer discretion is advised. Leota Mae Hodges was born on January 20th, 1942, and she was born in Missouri. This is her pictured with her 3 children, Kevin, Brenda, and Christine, and she was very happily married to Mr. Raymond Camp. Leota had actually just given birth to their baby just a few months prior to this story happening. And this was a very happy family. There weren't any known marital issues. The kids were happy. The couple, they were happy. But one day in 1967, all of that came crashing down. 25-year-old Leota was home with her 3 children on July 10th, 1967. Her husband had been at work. According to the 2 older children, they had been outside playing in the backyard, and Leota was sort of coming in and out of the house, checking on the kids and taking care of some chores. This is the home they lived in Des Moines, Iowa. The kids were outside playing sometime before 12 p.m. And at one point they saw their mom come out to the backyard where they were playing to hang up some clothes to dry. Then Leota goes back inside and the kids don't hear or see anything unusual. Sometime after 12 p.m. the kids go back into the house. They see their baby sister drinking her bottle. Then the 2 kids who still haven't seen their mom go into one of the bedrooms, and that is where they find their mom. They found their mother in a pool of blood on the bed with a knife protruding out of her back. One of the very young children, because they were no more than 4 or 5 years old, instinctively pulled the knife out of their mom's back, and then they ran to a neighbor's house so that they could call for help. They told the neighbor, "Mommy's bleeding." When first responders arrive, she is moaning, so she's still alive. She was fully clothed, but her arms and legs were bound, and her arms were tied behind her back. And whoever did this used neckties from the closet to do it. And she had another necktie shoved into her mouth and down her throat to prevent her from screaming. They also found that there were 2 knives used to stab her. One was found on a bedside table, the one that children took out. Then the other knife they found in the bedroom, but it was missing its handle. They only had the blade. By the time they were able to get her to the hospital, it was already too late. Leota Camp was pronounced dead. Her husband was notified while he was at work, and he drove home. They knew right away he had nothing to do with this. He was confirmed to be at work, and so he was ruled out. Leota had been stabbed a total of 4 times. 2 of those wounds punctured her lungs, and she died of internal hemorrhaging. She was not sexually assaulted. The police would label this guy a kook, or a pervert, said he was a scared pervert, that he probably intended to sexually assault her, but got scared and just killed her and then ran off. They also believe that this may have been an attempted robbery, that she had gone outside to do some stuff with the laundry. Her would-be killer entered the home, and then she walked back in, and he wasn't expecting that, and he probably threatened to kill the baby if she screamed. And that's why the kids or any of the neighbors, they didn't hear any screaming or anything. The kids didn't see whoever this was walk into the house or leave it. Leota's husband would say that a couple of weeks prior, Leota received or answered the phone at home. When Leota answered the phone, a man said, "Where you been?" And then she said something in response because she thought it was like a friend pranking her. But then the guy said something extremely perverted and hung up the phone. And he never called back again. Their number wasn't listed, and so they don't know if this was like a random chance call or if this was someone she or the family knew. And was that person her killer? Neighbors did see something, however, that day. Neighbors saw a 1965 or 1966 black fastback Ford Mustang that had parked, and then they saw a man kind of walk diagonally towards the camp home and into the home. Those couple neighbors who saw this man helped provide information to police to come up with this composite drawing of that man. This is believed to be the person who killed Leota Camp. It seems like he entered from the front of the house, and that's why the kids didn't see him, because they were in the backyard. They said he looked to be about 20 to 25 years old, which means today he'd be somewhere around 77, maybe over 80 years old. A chance he could still be alive. But he didn't look familiar to anyone, like no one knew who he was. In terms of evidence they had at the house, this is in 1967. They didn't know about DNA yet. And so sometimes evidence wasn't always collected the way they would collect it now in order to preserve that type of evidence. But I have to assume they obviously still have the knife and whatever clothing she was wearing. I'm sure they still have all the neckties that were used to tie her up. And nowadays they can take that and they can pull DNA from it. I don't know if they have tried that yet or not, because they could still do genealogical DNA testing with the whole Ancestry.com stuff, or, what they did with the Golden State Killer. But to this day, Leota's killer has never been caught. There have really been no suspects named. Nobody knows who this man is. He entered the house and killed her. For what reason, nobody knows. If you have information, you can call 515-283-4864. He wore ladies' underoos and would record himself on video doing so, and he was also a double murderer. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Margaret Eby and Nancy Ludwig. Viewer discretion is advised. Margaret Eby was a 55-year-old music professor who lived in Flint, Michigan. The last time anyone could recall actually seeing her alive was on November 7th, 1986, when friends of hers, who they had all just gone to a party, had dropped her back off at her house. Well, on November 9th, 1986, just 2 days later, her friends concerned would try to find her. When they got to her house, Margaret Eby was found brutally murdered inside. There was no forced entry, there were no kicked-in doors, broken windows, anything like that. Margaret Eby had been sexually assaulted and she had been stabbed to death. The coroner was able to take male bodily fluid from her body. They also had some drops of blood and they found a fingerprint on a faucet in her bathroom. But that fingerprint back in 1986 did not match anyone, and they weren't really at a place yet with DNA technology where they could just easily find who the DNA belonged to. So her case goes cold. This is 41-year-old Nancy Ludwig. Nancy and her husband Art lived in Minnesota, but Nancy was a flight attendant. On February 17th, 1991, she would leave her home to board a flight, and this particular flight that she was working was going to be going to Detroit, Michigan. Sadly, this was the last flight she would ever take. She was staying overnight at the Hilton Airport Hotel. The following day, the housekeepers would discover her brutally murdered body inside the room. Everything that she brought with her, including her luggage, her wallet, her purse, everything was stolen. Nancy herself was found partially off the bed. She had been sexually assaulted. She had been tied at the wrists with this twine, and she too had been stabbed to death. They also found this bloody rag inside the bathroom of the hotel room, and there was indications that her killer had showered himself before he left the room. In this instance, there were witnesses who saw a man who fit this description sort of running from the hotel and got into a gold-colored Monte Carlo and took off. And so they put out an $80,000 reward to see if anyone could help find out who this man is. It would actually be Margaret Eby's son who would see the story about Nancy Ludwig's murder in the newspaper, and he said everything about her murder sounded almost identical to what happened to his mom, Margaret. So he contacts police, and they begin looking into possible connections. At first, police believe that there is a lot of similarities between these two murders. In both cases, the killer had washed himself off in the bathroom. They were posed in pretty much the same way. They had both been stabbed. They had both been sexually assaulted. But unfortunately, it wouldn't be until 2001 when DNA technology had advanced a lot, where they were then finally able to take the male bodily fluid found with both victims and compare it, and that DNA came from the exact same person. They were both sexually assaulted by the same guy, meaning they were both likely murdered by the same person. Then they took the fingerprints they found with her crime scene and the fingerprint they found at her crime scene, compared them, again, a match. They put that fingerprint into the system, and it comes up with a hit. It came from Jeffrey Wayne Gorton. He had been convicted in the past of burglaries and that kind of thing. His fingerprints were in the system, but they weren't digital back then when these murders initially happened. And so it did take them longer to be able to quickly find a match. Well, it turns out he owned a gold Monte Carlo, the same type of vehicle that was found fleeing from the crime scene at the hotel. Well, they also found out that he at one point worked for a lawn service company that actually provided service to Margaret Eby, and he was employed there when she was murdered. He also lived just down the road from her. But a fingerprint match does not mean that he was the killer for sure. They needed his DNA to make absolute certain that he was the guy. So they followed him around, and he went to a place to eat food, and they noticed him drinking from a styrofoam cup. So when he left, his cup was still there, so police officers quickly grabbed it. They swabbed it at the lab, and they got a nice sample of DNA from it, and it was a match. His DNA was found with both victims, along with his fingerprint. At his home, they found just a massive pile of women's underwear, and on most of them, there were names written on them. They also found a videotape, a tape with hours of footage of him stalking women. Gives me Poughkeepsie Tapes vibes. And there was a bunch of footage of him trying on the ladies' underwear and posing in bed, just taking video of it for whatever bizarre reason. They try to question him, but he says he wants a lawyer. But he's arrested and charged with both murders. The evidence against him was unbelievably overwhelming. He was convicted of all charges and was given 3 consecutive life terms. I don't recommend wearing ladies' underwear there. Who the job was it to warn me about this Because you failed. You failed. I asked a friend, can you recommend any good horror movies? Watch Terrifier, they say. Watch All Hallows Eve, they say. Watch Terrifier 2, they said. This is Art the Clown. Okay, Pennywise? Ain't got Bozo the Clown? No, sorry. Y'all are babies next to this. I am dry heaving even just looking at this thing. I don't think this is an actor. This is a real thing. This is a guy. They filmed this guy with the camera. Just murdering people. Art the Clown, to me, is like Mr. Bean meets Pennywise. Oh, God, look at the way he smiles. Oh, God, I'm just so emotional about this. Does he brush his teeth with beet juice? I don't get it. And his cute little top hat is like, like, ugh. Oh, he's got a friend now, too. Great. A little spawn. That's wonderful. Just in case you were wondering, hey, can I sleep tonight? Nope. So whoever's job it was to warn me about him, you. He would go on a Memorial Day killing spree in 1993. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Memorial Day murders. Viewer discretion is advised. On May 31st, 1991, the body of Jason Hampton was discovered in Ware County, Georgia. That same day, the body of his fiancée, Charlie Dixon, was also found. And then one more body would be discovered later that same day. The body of Gail O'Quinn Taylor. Jason and Charlie, who were a couple in high school, who were just a few days away from graduation. Jason was 19, Charlie was 18. Well, they had been out at Safford's Lake in Ware County, Georgia, just the night before, which was Memorial Day. I believe they found Jason's pickup truck near the lake, but the bodies were discovered in different locations. Charlie had been shot multiple times with a .22 caliber, and they found male bodily fluid in her, and there was indications that she had been sexually assaulted after she was dead. Gail Taylor had also been shot to death, and she had a knife wound or a cut to her wrist. But the shell casings left behind at her murder and shell casings found near the other victims were all the same. They were all fired from the same gun. It appeared that Gail had been killed in an attempted robbery of her home. She had no connection to the two teenagers, though. 7 months later, this man here is arrested for unrelated charges. His name is Billy Rollerson. He had some issues with the law before. When they processed the DNA found with Charlie, plus they also found blood left behind at one of the crime scenes, the male bodily fluid and the blood all matched the same person. And when he was arrested, he gave his DNA up. Turns out, it was a match. It was his male bodily fluid inside of Charlie. It was his blood left behind at the crime scene. Oh God, I gotta change my look immediately. They searched his home and they found some fishing rods that actually would later be determined that belonged to Jason. They were stolen from his pickup truck. They also found parts of a .22 caliber rifle, which would later be determined to be the murder weapon. When confronted with this evidence, he admitted to it. He said he killed all three of them. He pulled up next to them at the lake, Jason and Charlie. He didn't know them. He just suddenly jumped into the bed of the truck and shot both of them. The rifle he used, he stole a few weeks before the murders from another residence. Then he says he broke into Gail Taylor's home. She didn't appear to be home. Turns out she was, and so he shot and killed her when he saw her. His motive for killing these two, I don't know. For fishing rods, that's insane. He would end up being convicted of all three murders and was sentenced to death 3 times. He's still awaiting his execution. This is the last known image of a man who would be dead in less than an hour from when it was taken. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Michael Hunter. Viewer discretion is advised. February 24th, 1992 at 8:33 p.m. A man is seen driving on a motorcycle who is going around back and forth very erratically. He is swerving right and left. He finally pulls into a gas station where he collapses. This is a recreation, but an ambulance is called. The paramedics work on this man who has just collapsed off his motorcycle. There is no blood anywhere. Not on him, not on the motorcycle, not on the ground. There was no apparent injuries seen. But unfortunately, the man would be pronounced dead. That man was 30-year-old Michael Hunter. They would later find out he died from 3 gunshot wounds. One in his abdomen, one that pierced through his aorta, and one into one of his kneecaps. The entry wounds of the shots were so tiny that no one could actually see them. Michael lived in Emeryville, which is near the San Francisco area in California. He was a motorcycle enthusiast, but he also competed in motorcycle races. He was very, very good. But sometimes these competitions could be dangerous. But Michael loved the danger aspect. He didn't have any enemies, no jilted ex-lovers. He wasn't involved in any kind of illegal dealings like with drugs or anything. Police are able to retrace his steps that night. They find out that he leaves his house sometime around 7:45 p.m. Just a few minutes later, he is spotted at an ATM withdrawing $20 in cash. This is the actual image taken from that ATM. He does not appear to be in any kind of distress or danger. There doesn't appear to be any person standing behind him or near him. However, in one image, and I noticed that they didn't mention this on the Unsolved Mysteries episode, there is a shot where he is kind of like, you can see he's peering over his shoulder, and that does not look like a motorcycle to me. That looks like an actual car. You can see the outline of it with the headlights and the tire there that's parked just behind him. The Unsolved Mysteries episode said that they didn't see anything suspicious by him in this ATM footage. But less than an hour later, Michael Hunter, after this image, is going to be dead. I'm just curious as to who is in this car. Now, he wasn't accosted or anything at the ATM, and the reason why they know that is because he then went to a liquor store where he purchased a small bottle of whiskey, which was later found in his jacket pocket, completely unopened. Is it possible that whoever this car is followed him? It's just speculation. After the liquor store, police have absolutely no idea where he went. They think he may have gone to an overlook which looks over the Bay Bridge. I guess this is somewhere he would go often just to look out at the bay. And this is only speculation on the police's end because they have absolutely no idea. But they think he may have gone here and possibly somebody approached him trying to rob him or maybe even steal his motorcycle. But Michael was not someone who would ever give up his motorcycle. It was his baby, his prized possession. So did the person who maybe potentially tried to rob him get mad that he wouldn't give it up and then threatened him? And then Michael drove off and the guy fired a couple shots at him? Maybe. However, they didn't find any evidence of the crime at this area. They didn't find any blood or signs of a struggle or altercation there. They also think, well, maybe what if Michael had gone to this area or somewhere near it and saw something he wasn't supposed to see? Maybe Michael was killed because he witnessed a crime taking place, that he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Again, it's really just speculation. They didn't notice anything being stolen off of him, like money in his wallet or anything. It was all still there. The gas station was several miles away from where that lookout was. So how long was he on the motorcycle with those 3 gunshot wounds? How far did he travel? They don't know. There was one other thing that they found in their investigation. Roughly a year prior, Michael allegedly left a bar or a nightclub or something, and he was kind of intoxicated, and he accidentally sideswiped a couple of cars with his motorcycle. Well, when Michael did that, there were a couple people who came out of the bar, and it was revealed that the people who owned those cars were local gang members. And then, this is just allegedly, a few days before his murder, he was at a car dealership getting his motorcycle serviced, when allegedly a person walks into the dealership, a person who was supposedly a part of this local gang, that walked in and actually saw Michael Hunter there and said, quote, "Oh shit, that's the guy," end quote. And then the guy took off. So the theory is they recognized him from the incident that took place a year prior, and then I guess followed him around? I don't know. Police did look into this, but they didn't really get anywhere with it. No evidence, no witness statements or testimony, and to this very day, his case is still unsolved. Nobody knows who shot and killed 30-year-old Michael Hunter. But somebody somewhere out there has to know the truth. And perhaps that someone is you. If you have information about the murder of Michael Hunter, please contact the Emeryville Police Department in California at 510-596-3700. help bring his killer or killers to justice. Her parents said she ran away, but everybody knows they're lying. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Monique Daniels. Viewer discretion is advised. Monique Daniels was a part of a very large family. She had a few siblings. Monique had been physically abused by her biological father for several years, and eventually he goes away to prison for sexual assault charges against another individual. But now her mom, Candace, has a new husband. His name is Chuck Daniels. Both of them serve in the United States military. Monique was last reported seen on June 2nd, 1992. She was last seen in her home in Moore, Oklahoma. Monique's mom and then her sister Angelique and I think one of her brothers, they were actually out of town that particular time. They were on some sort of tour. But when they got home, they noticed that Monique was missing from the house, and their house was in complete disarray. It was like a garbage heap, and the house was always really clean. Now, Chuck was home when Monique disappeared, and when they asked him, where is she, he just said, she's gone again. She had apparently run away from home a couple of times previous. I guess her parents forced her to have an abortion when she got pregnant. She didn't like that, and so she ran away, but then she came back. In January of 1993, Monique's aunt, who lives in a different state, called the police there locally to ask what the status is on her missing persons case. Well, police are like, what missing persons case? They didn't file one. So the aunt calls Candace and says, what the hell? Well, she says, oh, don't worry. Monique actually called the house a couple of days ago. She said that she talked to her sister Angelique and everything was fine. Then a day or so after that, they get a couple of letters from Monique. In these letters, Monique says, I went to Texas, I got married, and I ended up having a little girl, a daughter. And now her and her husband are living happily in Alaska. Monique's aunt didn't believe this story, so she called police and said, hey, can you get those letters from Candace and confirm that that's the handwriting, that's Monique's handwriting? And police go to the house literally like a day or so later. They ask for the letters, but guess what, guys? The letters were stolen. They were just stolen like yesterday. Someone broke into the house and stole a box of stuff, including all the letters that Monique wrote. What a weird thing to steal. Chuck was overheard saying, you know what? The house is so much nicer now that Monique hasn't been here. It's quieter. Yeah, that's not a red flag whatsoever. In January of 1994, Monique's sister Angelique runs away from the house and goes to live with her aunt. And guess what happens the moment she is no longer at the house? Her parents report her missing immediately. And then Angelique drops a bombshell. This is her later on as an adult. That phone call that Monique made, it didn't happen. Those letters, she wrote them. Her mom made her. Angelique was basically pressured by her parents to write those letters. She was afraid for her life, basically. Another strange thing that police would notice later on was that after Monique disappeared, the family had brand new family portraits done. And all the photos of Monique in the house were gone and replaced with these new family photos. The kids weren't allowed to ask about where Monique was. They weren't allowed to talk about Monique at all. So once Angelique tells police that she was forced to write those letters and the phone call never actually happened, police go to Chuck and Candace. And they admit it. They say, yeah, everything Angelique told you is true. Maybe we should file a missing person report now on Monique, huh? Wow, the timing is wonderful for you folks. Angelique and a couple of the brothers would actually tell police that there was a lot of abuse in this house. Physical abuse. The day that Monique disappeared, according to one of the brothers, Monique and her stepdad got into a really big argument. The next thing that Chuck's sons know is that he says, hey, we're going to go on a fishing trip right now. Go say bye to your sister, but don't open her door. When the little kids peeked into Monique's bedroom through a crack, they said they saw her lying on the floor with her legs crossed and she wasn't moving. Another brother, though, said that he actually hugged Monique that day before they left for the fishing trip, and that she said goodbye. After the fishing trip, Chuck parks the truck with the two boys inside the garage. He says, do not get out of this truck, and he leaves them in that garage for an hour. Chuck then lets the two boys in the house and says, I have to go look for Monique. She's missing. He then locks his two sons in his bedroom for 2 days. And at one point afterwards, one of the brothers saw an oil barrel inside the bed of Chuck's truck. When confronted, the mother, Candace, said, Angelique she's mentally unstable. Don't believe anything she says. The two boys, they're lying about all the things they saw, all that stuff. It didn't happen. There has never been any physical evidence to prove that Monique is dead. They've never found her body. They've never found any blood, no signs of a struggle, no crime scene. They have no actual evidence. Police do believe that she is dead, but they do not have anything to put forth a case against her parents. Today, both of them live in Florida. They deny anything to do with whatever happened to Monique, and they don't cooperate with police anymore, and they don't make any public statements anymore. They've never been formally named as suspects either, because again, there's just no actual evidence. It's all just a bunch of hearsay. If Monique is alive, she would look something like this, but everybody knows she's not alive. They dug up the backyard of their property years later, but she wasn't there. If you have information, please call 405-793-5151.
In March of 2022, 4 men were convicted of gang raping, murdering, and then eating a monitor lizard. They were caught because the trail cams in the wildlife preserve recorded it.
This is true. What do you mean experts explain why? What? Who's an expert on this? Ugh. This happened in India. 4 men, yeah. They raped and then killed and then ate a monitor lizard. At first, when I looked it up, I was for sure that this happened in the United States because this probably is something that would happen here. I was just surprised to find out it wasn't here. It is a protected species there in India, and one of them also took a video of this event on their phone. For what? What are you going to do with the video? I don't know what happened to them. I know that they were arrested in 2022 in April, but I don't know if they were convicted or sentenced or just got slapped with a fine. Call me crazy, but I think if you are capable of, Jesus, God, of having intercourse with a lizard, then killing it and eating it, I feel like maybe you even though it's an animal, you may probably still pose as a threat to people if they would do the. Oh God, people. That's it. That's people. She was murdered all because of a bad grade. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Noema Graber. Viewer discretion is advised. Noema was actually born in Jalapa, which is in Mexico. Later on in life, she would become one of the very first women in Mexico to become a commercial airline pilot. And she had worked very hard and diligently to get to that. She would go on to marry a man named Paul, and then she would have 3 children. Eventually, at some point, the family moves to the States, and specifically to the Des Moines or Fairfield, Iowa area. Not only was she a commercial pilot, but she had also gone to school to get her teaching degree. And she would become a Spanish teacher here at Fairfield High School in Fairfield, Iowa. She was described as the angel of the family. She was someone who instilled and taught love to her children, and she taught them how to be warm and inviting and just good people. She had a lot of joy for life. She loved her kids, and she loved teaching. But in 2021, all of that would come to a very shocking end. It was here at Chautauqua Park in November of 2021. Here, specifically in this location, partially hidden under a tarp, they would find the body of 66-year-old Noema Graber. She had been severely beaten to death, and it only would end up taking a couple of days to piece together who did this and why. 16-year-old Jeremy Goodale would send a Snapchat message, and I guess this would implicate him in the murder of the Spanish teacher. And the person who received the Snapchat message immediately went to police. The Snapchat messages also implicated another student, this kid, 16-year-old Willard Miller. Well, Willard here had also been kind of bragging about something. He told another student, quote, "I caught someone with a baseball bat." So both students were brought in for questioning, and they both ended up saying what happened. Well, this all stemmed from Willard Miller. Miss Graber had given him a bad grade in his Spanish class. Witnesses would state that they saw him arguing with Miss Graber shortly before she was murdered, and this is what made him super mad, and he then reached out to his friend, Jeremy Goodale, and they hatched a plan to kill the teacher. They knew she would take her evening walks at Chautauqua Park, and they went there on November 2nd, 2021. They would surprise her and attack her by striking her over the head with a baseball bat, and they kept striking her until she was dead. Then they hid her body. Both of them tried to say that the other one was the main person, but both would end up taking plea deals. Willard got 35 years to life, and Jeremy got 25 years to life. She was found nearly 45 years ago, but nobody knows how she got there or who she is. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Perry County Jane Doe. Viewer discretion is advised. It was June of 1979 along an embankment of the Juniata River, which is in Perry County, Pennsylvania. A stonemason who was working in the area found a decomposed human body. And it was between the Juniata River and the eastbound lanes of Route 22/322 near Watts Township. The body was identified as a female somewheres between the ages of 15 or possibly into her 30s. She had medium-length hair, which was light brown, possibly blonde, approximately 5'6", and somewheres in the range of about 120 to 125 pounds. This is another recreation of her image. But because of how badly her body was decomposed, they have not been able to determine exactly how she died, but have ruled her death suspicious. It does kind of sound like they believe this was probably a homicide case. And based on decomposition, she may have died several months prior, possibly even as late as the end of 1978. She was wearing this exact shirt, and this is a cutout of the pants that she was wearing. She was also wearing several pieces of jewelry. She's also been nicknamed the girl with the turquoise jewelry. And police are hoping that anybody out there might recognize these pieces. But so far, nobody has. Nobody has come forward to identify her or any of the jewelry. In 2008, they did exhume her body in order to get DNA. And as of 2023, there was another company working on taking the DNA and trying to find out, through genealogical databases, hoping that someone may have put their DNA into the ancestral websites and hopefully they can link it that way. But as of me filming this video in 2024, they have not linked her to anyone yet. Some of the jewelry they discovered on her, they believed is Native American origins, possibly from the New Mexico or Arizona area. They've been able to determine that she likely grew up in the Great Lakes region, possibly in Canada, based on her dental work. I guess they can figure that out. And they analyzed her hair, and that told them she had visited the Southwest of the United States at some point recently, before her death. She also had some dental work done. She had teeth fillings. A back tooth had been removed 4 or 5 years prior to her discovery. At some point, she had a fractured rib that had healed. If you know who she is, please call 717-671-7500. Today is Sunday, May 5th, 2024. It is also known as Red Dress Day. It is a day to bring awareness to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so I just want to read off the list of names that I have on my own list. This is only a tiny fraction of the names that are actually out there. Abigail Otuva, Adele Rose Mary Matinet, Audrey Anna Jackson, Adrienne Amicons, Alberta Williams, Alicia Darar, Allison Highwolf, Alameda Old Crane, Amber Tucaro, Andra Adams, Angela Marie Heath, Anita Lucci, Anja Charlotte, Anna Scott, Arden Pepion, Ruby Brugier, Ashley Loring, Ashlyn Mike, Ashton Snell, Babette Crystal Green, Barbara Celestine, Bonnie Three Irons, Cammie Rideshorse, Carla Yellowbird, Cecilia Barber Finona, Charlene Mancha Longtime Sleeping, Chelsea Poorman, Daisy Mae Heath, Darlene Billy, Denise Nomi, Destiny Louise Lloyd, Diane Lynn Medicine Horse, Eleanor Trujillo, Emily Reisling Yorock, Faith Hedgepeth, Faith Lindsay, Frida Knows His Gun, Gail Teo, Hannah Harris, Henny Scott, Janice Marie Hannigan, Janice Marie Wilson, Liz Morigo, Jermaine Charlot, Jeannie Betty Wyman John, Jocelyn Watt, Jody Howard, Karen Louise John Lee Wallahy, Kaisera Stops Pretty Places, Khadijah Britton, Kimberly Iron, Kristen Huntington, Linda Dave, Loretta Saunders, Lori Jealous of Him, Mary Davis Johnson, Mavis Josephine McKay, Millie Oldcrow, Minnie Rainbow Andy, Misty Upham, Mona Renee Vallow, Micah Westwolf, Monica Bercier Wicker, Myra Whitstone, Naoma Alexander George, Natalia Castaway, Nicole Frenchman, Olivia Lonebear, Pepita Redhair, Rescinda Whiteclay, Ramona Wilson, Rhonda Gardiner, Rita Papaki, Roberta Jean Rains, Rosalita Longi, Rosella Woodenthigh, Rosenda Strong, Roylyn Rideshorse, Rosilia Lou Thule So Happy, Sabrina Rosette, Sandra Lee Smiscon, Savannah Graywind, Selena Not Afraid, Shakaya Blue Harding, Sherry D. Sampson Elwell, Sherry Lynn Jacquat, Susanna Norton, Tana Shane, Tiana Lee Raincloud, Tiffany Morrison, Tiki Laverdiere, Tina Fontaine, Tony Fisher, Tony Marie Green, Charmaine Sanchi, Mercedes Myron, Morgan Harris, Moshkade Bijakikwe, Rebecca Contois. That is only somewhere around 100 names. There are thousands and thousands and thousands more. Okay, let's see how fast this filter can destroy my ego. What in all of human history is that? Lawyers knew where two of the victims were. Too bad they wouldn't tell the families. Oh, God. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Robert Garrow. Viewer discretion is advised. Robert grew up in a kind of troubled home, I guess you can say. Getting some of that chest moss in my mouth. He would describe his parents, and his siblings would confirm this, as they were violent disciplinarians. There was abuse, physical abuse in the house. As he got older, he would start fighting back against his dad, and police had been called to their home numerous times because of these fights. He also had an older sister who would later go on to be the mother to a woman named Suzanne Basso. And Suzanne Basso would go on to be convicted of murder. I guess it runs in the family. Meanwhile, Robert, he gets married by about 1957 or so. He has a kid, but he keeps getting fired from all of these jobs he keeps trying to get. Between about 1961 and around 1970 or so, he would commit a series of rapes where he had been convicted of at least one of them, but was paroled pretty early on. Some of these rapes were of very young children, and they paroled him. Wow. Between July 11th and July 29th of 1973, Robert Garrow would then go on to murder 4 people. One of the victims was a man named Daniel Porter. He was camping with his girlfriend Susan Petz, and she would be reported missing after he was found dead at a campsite. Before those, on July 11th, a young girl, a teenager named Alicia Hauk, would be reported missing. And then fast forward to the end of the month, on July 29th, he murders a 18-year-old man named Philip Domblewski. He was found tied to a tree and murdered. Both Philip and Daniel were found at their respective crime scenes, but Susan and Alicia were never found. And at first, she wasn't really connected to these other cases. There were 3 surviving witnesses to the Philip Domblewski murder. They would go to police and report exactly what the person looked like, and police knew who this was. Based on the description, based on the MO, they knew that it was Robert Garrow. This happened in the Adirondacks in New York, and after this was reported, there would be a statewide in New York manhunt. They were pulling over every single person, and they were making every person open their trunk. They were looking in the back seats of every car. They had been searching the woods where the murders had occurred, but they were having a hard time finding him. Everybody in the area who was driving was warned to not stop for literally anyone. Do not pick up anyone. Robert was finally found 60 miles away, a few days or so into the manhunt, and they had him cornered, and they had to shoot him because he was posing a threat. He was shot, I believe, 3 times, but survived. This is him after that, and he tried to claim he now had paralysis, and he even tried to sue the police in New York for causing paralysis, but then it turns out he was faking it. He didn't have that at all. He was just a guy with 3 bullets in him. One of his defense attorneys, they weren't sure that he had actually committed any of these crimes, but he then confesses to 2 of his attorneys that he also killed 2 other girls, the 2 missing girls. He drew them a map and told them where to find their bodies. To cut a long story short here, they found the bodies, both of them. But they claimed, because of lawyer-client privilege, that legally they were not allowed to disclose the location of those bodies, and they didn't. They did not provide any information to the families who wanted their loved ones home. One of the attorneys actually ended up moving some of the skeletal remains, but this confirmed to his attorneys that he was in fact a murderer and that he was responsible for the murders of the 2 men, Daniel Porter and Philip Domblewski. Robert would then go to trial where he pled not guilty by reason of insanity, but the jury said to go basically F yourself, you are guilty. He was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life for the murder of the 2 men. Well, not too soon into his incarceration, he escaped prison, and once again another manhunt for Robert Garrow began. Well, this time it turns out his lawyers found out that there was a hit list. One of the lawyer's daughters was basically, Robert had said something to imply that he may come after her. And now the lawyers decide to talk, because they knew where Robert Garrow was. And they said the lives of their children were not worth him being out there. So they broke their attorney-client privilege to save their own family, and they eventually found him. They would corner him in the woods. He had a gun. He fired at the police fired back, and Robert Garrow was killed. And the saga eventually ended. His 2 attorneys stood by their actions to not reveal where the bodies of the 2 females were. One of them would end up being indicted because one of them had moved the remains of one of them. But in the end, both of his lawyers were not found guilty of anything. They got off scot-free technically, but in the end, they ended up becoming the scum to people in their profession. They lost their law practices, but technically they were doing what they were legally supposed to do, or not do. Both Alicia and Susan's bodies would eventually be found, returned to their families, and given a proper burial. Their monster is dead. He was shoved out of his car and his killers just sped away. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Royal Cumbie Jr. Viewer discretion is advised. Royal Cumbie Jr., who was born in 1936, was a very happily married man. He and his wife had 3 children. He had 2 sons and a daughter, and then eventually they would have a grandson. He was such a good dad and an even better grandpa. He adored his children and his grandchild. Royal was considered a very straightforward guy, never got into any kind of trouble. In fact, he was always someone who went out of his way to help people, even strangers. And that may have potentially led to what happened to him. Royal worked in Texas City, Texas. He was an engineer, I believe. And he did other little jobs here and there as well. It was Sunday, May 29th, 1983. He just got off of work. He was seen leaving the refinery he worked at by a security guard at 6:49 p.m. At 7:27 p.m., just down this road here, which was on Avenue Q, and specifically here at this intersection, 911 gets some phone calls with regards to a man having been shot. When police arrive, there is in fact a man on the ground with blood everywhere. That man was confirmed to be 46-year-old Royal Cumbie Jr. He was pronounced deceased at the scene. He had been shot 5 times in his back, and his car had been stolen. According to witnesses, there was one vehicle who was behind him when this event occurred. The witness would give a description of one of the 2 men who was in the car with Royal. This is that composite drawing of one of those men. The witness basically saw the car kind of going back and forth, and all of a sudden, Royal is shoved out of his car, and the 2 men inside speed away. Nobody knows who those 2 men were. Royal had no connections to any criminal activity. His family believes that he likely probably picked up some hitchhikers who needed help. That he had picked them up because that's the person he was. This really helpful man. But this time, sadly, it cost him his life. His vehicle was actually found a couple hours later abandoned, and his killers are still out there somewhere. They have never been caught. He had no enemies. There was just nothing they could find that would have why this happened. It had to have been a stranger thing. Someone he just didn't know. In recent years, police have tried to see if they can get DNA off of like the clothing he was wearing, because maybe he fought his attackers. But as of me filming this video at least, they haven't found anything. And the murder of Royal Cumbie Jr. in Santa Fe, Texas is still unsolved. If you have any information, you can call 409-925-2000.
I keep feeling like I should be waking up from a dream
Sure.
right now, and it's just not happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's like a movie or something.
Where's the tears? Isn't that something? Anyway, hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Scott family murders. Viewer discretion is advised. It was November 2nd, 2015 in Pendleton, South Carolina, which was just a couple of days after Halloween. A woman named Amy Velarde would call 911 in a panic because she just discovered her family had been murdered. And this absolutely shocked the community because Pendleton, South Carolina had like less than 4,000 people living in it. And there was like never any crime there. And now you had not just 1, but 4 people have been murdered inside their home. It appeared they had all been shot. They would be identified as Mike and Kathy Scott, and then also Mike and Kathy's moms, Barbara Scott and Violet Taylor. From what it looked like at the crime scene, and according to the coroner, they had all been shot very quickly. And based on where they were, they really weren't even able to run away or flee. And so likely there was probably at least 2 people involved in this killing. But then the coroner would reveal after all 4 autopsies that it wasn't actually the gunshots that killed them. They were all shot after they were dead. They all actually died from being stabbed and having their throats cut. This was to them an extremely brutal and savage attack. Kathy was 60, Mike was 59, Barbara was 80, and Violet was 82. To do that to anyone, but let alone 2 80-year-old innocent women, like this was personal. This felt very personal to police. There did not appear to be any forced entry, and nothing really seemed to be stolen. So they really didn't know what the motive here was. Why these 4 people? So Amy Velarde here, the one who called 911, is actually the daughter of Kathy Scott, one of the victims. And then this is her husband, Rossmore Ross Velarde. The 2 of them actually lived on the property where the murders happened. Amy and her husband lived on a double-wide trailer that was on the property. And then Amy and her husband continued to live there for about a year or so after the murders happened. The clip I played you at the beginning was one of a few clips where Amy would go on the news and she would, cry. In one of those interviews, she said, quote, "I don't understand why any of it has happened, and I just keep thinking it's a dream I'm going to wake up from. Whoever did this, I don't see how you can live with yourself." End quote. Interesting she would say that. Amy and her husband, Rossmore, they later filed a lawsuit against the sheriff's department. And this is from that lawsuit court appearance. The lawsuit was with regards to returning vehicles and I guess almost $90,000 in cash that was seized from the home. Not just the home where the murders happened, but their home as well. Several investigators collected all of this stuff as evidence, and they sued them to get that stuff back. They said that they had no evidentiary value to the murders, so why did they need them? Why did the sheriff's department even need them? The sheriff's department would say, well, we can, test the bills for like DNA, blood samples, the cars, there could be evidence in them. It's just how an investigation works. She would later say, quote, I would like to point out how wonderful everyone in this community has been, all of our great friends and the amazing family we love so very much praying for us. But this case goes cold for about 8 years or so, until March of 2023. Police announced they have arrested 2 suspects for the quadruple homicide. Those suspects, Amy Velarde and Ross Velarde. The sheriff's department would say, we pretty much knew this from the very beginning, but you have to be able to prove it, and you can't just say it. They have both been charged with all 4 counts of murder. However, the sheriff's department has not released what exactly led them to this arrest, like what evidence they had. But everywhere I read, they sound pretty damn confident that the ones responsible for this are these 2. They have always denied having any involvement in the murders. Police believe that the murders actually took place on Halloween night. There was an untouched bowl of candy just inside the house by the front door, and it was full, and it didn't look like any of it had been passed out. So they pretty much put Halloween as the night of the murders. With Amy and Ross living on the property, the same land, really not that far from the house, how did it take them several days to even find out this happened? And police did say that it appeared that the 2 of them had gone into the crime scene and had been in there for some time before calling 911. For what? Cleaning it up? Who knows? At the time of me filming this video in May of 2024, the 2 of them have not gone to trial. There hasn't even been like any plea agreements or anything like that yet. So this is definitely still ongoing. And hopefully if I can remember, I can come back when there is a resolution to this and provide an update. But as of right now, Amy Velarde and her husband Ross Velarde are considered the prime and only suspects in the quadruple homicide. The homicide of Amy's mother and Amy's grandmother, as well as 2 other family members. If they are guilty, there is always that special place in hell for them. Okay, so your prison name. Well, I'm over 150 pounds, sorry about it. So big. Color of your shirt, black and white. Last thing you had in your mouth, okay, go. Okay, so, big black and white dick. Grapes. Big black and white grapes. Oh, God. There are human pieces of garbage, and then there's this thing. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Shelby Bookstore murders. Viewer discretion is advised. The Shelby Bookstore was located in Shelby, North Carolina, and it was an adult bookstore that catered to the LGBTQIA+ community. A lot of the clientele there especially were gay men. On January 17th, 1987, there were about 5 people inside the bookstore. There were a couple of employees, then a couple customers, all men. Well, according to one of the survivors, there were at least 3 gunmen who entered the bookstore and they were all wearing masks, and they just opened fire and started shooting everyone in the building. Then they set the building on fire and fled the scene. All 5 men had been shot in their head, but 2 of them miraculously managed to survive. They got out of the building before the fire took over and they called for help. One of the victims was 19-year-old employee of the bookstore, Travis Melton. The other 2 victims were 29-year-old Kenneth Godfrey and 26-year-old Paul Weston. I've been trying to find photos of them, like through obituaries and whatnot, but I cannot find them. But those 3 men would die from their injuries. The investigation into this took police down a couple different paths. Like, was one of these men, was it really connected to just one of them? Maybe like an ex-lover, scorned lover, what have you, jealous person that came in and wanted to kill him, but then shot everyone else. Then a robbery that just went wrong. They did steal from the cash registers. There really wasn't much money, but they took some money. But ultimately, what police ended up focusing on was that this was a hate crime. These men were killed because they were gay men. So it led them to 2 men in particular, Douglas Sheets and Robert Jackson. Photos of them, unfortunately, I do not have. These two men were very well-known white supremacists in the area, and they were connected to this guy, Fraser Glenn Miller. Yeah, his hat should tell you all you need to know about him. This is him marching on the streets with this little megaphone, looking fabulous, right? Look at all these big, tough men matching in their little outfits with their shiny little megaphones. Well, through the investigation, they believe they found that this was just a targeted hate crime at this bookstore. It didn't really matter who was in it. They did not have any actual evidence, however, at the time to link Fraser Glenn Miller, but they had what they thought was enough evidence against the other two men, Douglas Sheets and Robert Jackson. The two of them were charged for the murders and attempted murders. They actually go to trial. But Douglas Sheets is found not guilty. And with Robert Jackson, well, they end up dropping the charges against him because the other man, Douglas Sheets, was acquitted. And they have the same evidence against him, and so there was no point going to trial. However, those two men would be found guilty of weapons charges related to a raid in Ozark, Missouri that also involved Fraser Glenn Miller. Well, they each got 20 years for those charges. Fraser Glenn Miller was also given those same charges for the weapons, but he agreed to testify for the prosecution in the Shelby bookstore murders. Because of that cooperation, he only got about 5 years for the weapon charges. Ugh. Fast forward to April of 2014. This is Fraser Glenn Miller. Still looking awful. Okay. Well, his hateful little heart would lead him to more murders. He would end up killing Reet Underwood, Dr. William Corporon, and Teresa Lamano. They were murdered at Jewish centers in Overland Park, Kansas. And these were targeted hate crime attacks. And it sounds like the prosecution was given some information that he may have had more direct involvement in the Shelby bookstore murders, because the other two men who were supposed to go to trial and whatnot, well, their alibis ended up checking out, kind of, but his didn't for the Shelby bookstore murders. That he had this group called the White Patriot Party, which published little pamphlets. And in that pamphlet, kind of before his trial for this triple homicide, the one in 2014, there would be mention in that pamphlet of them taking credit for the bookstore arson. They didn't say the murders, just burning it down. But that was done by the same person or persons who killed the men. Oh my God. Yeah, this was literally him at one of his trials doing that. He would be convicted of the triple homicide involving the Jewish centers, and he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. But sadly, he would never get that lethal injection. What a shame. Because if there's one guy I wouldn't mind him. Maybe like miss the vein a couple or 20 times, you know what I mean? But he ended up dying of natural causes, they said, in prison in 2021. There is a widespread belief that he had been directly involved in this triple homicide with other people from his little group. But unfortunately, he'll never be tried for it. I'm not really one to believe in heaven and hell, but if there is a hell, I hope he is sitting in a pot of boiling lava and being showered with the hottest flames possible. Too much, or I just wish these guys also got justice. The motive was they just wanted to shoot something. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Shirley Ramey. Viewer discretion is advised. This case happened in the little tiny town of Hope, Idaho, a place that has a population of about 100 people. Shirley Ramey was a 78-year-old and very happily married woman. Her husband, Daryl, of almost 60 years, absolutely loved her. They had 2 children who had grown up and moved away from Hope, but the 2 of them stayed in Hope. Shirley was at one point the clerk for the City Hall of Hope, Idaho, and she knew everything about anything. If they had questions about anything to do with Hope, Idaho, she knew it. She was an absolutely beloved member of this little town. She spent 25 years of her life working for it. It was April 5th, 2017. Shirley was there at their house on her own because her husband Daryl was out playing a game of cards with his friends. When he got back home, he approached the house, and on the porch he saw something that no one should ever have to see. His wife, Shirley Ramey, 78 years old, was dead. She had a gunshot wound through her head. and she was just lying on the porch in a pool of blood. Nobody could figure out why on earth this happened. There was apparently a couple of things stolen from the house, but they didn't really believe that that was truly the motive here. And why Shirley? Why shoot her? They just couldn't figure it out. One prominent thing that was stolen from the house was a Savage Model 99 rifle, which was Daryl's gun. The same day the murder happened, over in Lincoln County, Montana, a woman was arrested for a road rage incident involving guns. Both of those guns were taken in as evidence. The woman who was arrested in possession of these guns was this woman, Judith Carpenter. Well, it would be 2 years after this, in 2019, where the authorities for Hope, Idaho, discovered that these guns had been taken in. This is in a different place, so obviously they weren't totally connected. But one of the guns was the stolen gun from the Ramey house. The other gun, turns out it was the murder weapon. It was a Glock, and it was the one used to shoot and kill Shirley Ramey in her possession. Did Judith Carpenter know the Rameys? No. She had never really even been to Hope before. She was going to go to trial for the murder, based pretty much on the evidence of the stolen gun and the murder weapon being in her possession. But in 2020, she would end up taking an Alford plea and essentially admitted what happened. She was just driving through Hope, and she just happened to see Shirley. And she said, quote, "I just wanted to shoot something or someone." She had been battling mental health issues for years and nobody was helping her. She wasn't being treated. She was in and out of hospitals, but they always let her go. This was a random murder. So she took an Alford plea and was sentenced to 15 years to life. This question would be answered, but would she ever get justice? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Susan Harrison. Viewer discretion is advised. Susan was born on March 2nd, 1942 in Boston, Massachusetts. When she was 25, she would marry a man named Thomas Owsley, and the two of them would have 2 boys together. Their 2 children were about 5 years apart. The boys were really, really close to their mom. They absolutely loved her to pieces, and everything she did for them. By 1988, Susan and Thomas would actually get divorced. It was very amicable. Then she married a man named James Harrison. Their relationship was very rocky from the get-go. There was a lot of fighting, a lot of arguing, a lot of alcohol. Jim would try to paint it as all being her fault because he said she was very manic depressive. She would get in these big mood swings and she would become, violent, and he would have to defend himself against her. But Susan's 2 children would say that was completely false. All they ever witnessed was Jim being abusive to her. And so Susan and Jim had this very back and forth, on again, off again type relationship. It even got to a point where she would end up filing a restraining order against him, but then she would violate the restraining order herself by going to visit him. She went back to him a few times. But it did get to a point where the arguing and the fighting just kept on going, and she finally broke it off with him, and she moved out into her own home, and it appeared that everything was going great now. But then Susan would end up going back to Jim. And this really began to frustrate her 2 sons, who at this point are now essentially adults. And they told her, listen, it's either Jim or it's us. And she said, it's you guys. It's always you guys. So by August of 1994, Susan says, all right, I'm done. I choose my 2 sons, obviously. And on August 5th, 1994, Susan has plans to spend the evening with one of her sons. When he gets to her house that she's living in on her own, he notices the front door is open. Her car is missing, but there are keys on the counter, and Susan is nowhere to be found. And so her son, Nick Owsley, he had waited in the house until about 2 o'clock in the morning, but then she hadn't come home, and so he left. But he tells his brother John, hey, Mom, I don't know where she is. And so by the following day, when she still isn't back at her house, they report her missing to police. The first person they question, obviously, is Jim, her now ex-husband. He tells police that Susan was at his house on August 5th, that she had come there 3 different times that day. He said she was mad, but then she took a nap at the house, and then she woke up and she was fine. Then he says she took another nap, but then she woke up this time and she was really pissed. Which is it's a very strange story. And he says at about 10 o'clock that night, she got into her car, she took off, and he never saw her again. Her car was found about 3 weeks later, this is a recreation, at Washington National Airport, which was roughly 70 miles from her home in Ruxton, Maryland. The keys were in the ignition, the gas tank was half full, and it appeared that Susan had just gone to the airport and took off and just completely abandoned her friends, her family, and her 2 boys. However, they couldn't find any records of her purchasing an airline ticket or any records of her flying anywhere. And her 2 sons both said there's no way she would do that. Something is wrong. And pretty much the police actually agreed. They said this just wasn't adding up. And the police believed almost right away that she had met with foul play, but who was it by? And where was she? Police learned from her 2 sons about the abuse that she had been going through for many years. Back when her son Nick was 12 and her other son John was about 17 or 18, there was a night where John was touring college campuses and Nick was home alone with his mom and with Jim. And he woke up in the middle of the night, he heard a humongous argument, and he physically saw Jim being very physically abusive to his mom. He tried to protect his mom, and this was just one of many stories that police would hear about. Jim said he only ever did anything to her in self-defense. He actually was interviewed on Unsolved Mysteries. But her own kids and her friends, her colleagues, all said that Jim had to have done something to her. He just had to have. It has to be him. And police, for the most part, agree. But the problem is where is she? Well, about 2 years after she's reported missing, 2 hunters are in the woods near Wolfsville, Maryland, and they're deep in the woods when they stumble across a partially buried skeleton. They would inform police based on some jewelry the skeleton had on them and dental records. This was confirmed to be the body of Susan Harrison. I don't know if they actually ruled exactly how she died, but they did determine that this was definitely a homicide. Nick and John filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Jim Harrison, and it started off as like a $17 million lawsuit, but they settled out of court, and the amount of money is unknown. However, even with that, police did not have any physical evidence to show, to prosecute Jim Harrison for Susan's murder, and they never placed charges on him. Susan's family, Susan's friend, everybody in Susan's life, even the police, believe that Jim Harrison killed her, but they just cannot prove it. And in 2007, at the age of 71, he dies peacefully, never held accountable for her murder. And if he did kill her, Susan and her 2 boys never got the justice they rightfully deserved. A killer would leave this hand-drawn map to the location of his victim. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Teresa Lockhart. Viewer discretion is advised. Teresa was born on March 8th, 1973 in the Kalamazoo, Michigan area. I know she had a couple of siblings, and I believe her brother had passed away before this case occurred, as had her father. Teresa was an avid runner, very, very athletic. She also loved to hike, and she taught Zumba classes. Teresa was a volunteer at animal shelters. She was someone who helped out at her church all the time, and she was a teacher. She was a K-12 Spanish teacher, and she had taught at numerous different schools. Her students said that she was a really awesome teacher. She was incredibly patient with them, and she was always around to help them with anything they needed. Teresa was also married to this guy here. That's Christopher Lockhart, who I believe had 2 children of his own before the 2 of them got married. According to friends and family and colleagues, they would say that Teresa and Christopher, around the time this case happened, were kind of struggling. They had hit a really rough patch in their marriage. They had been married for somewhere around a decade or so. Between May 15th and May 17th of 2017, Teresa had called off of work, which was really rare for her. She didn't do that. Her colleagues at the school thought it just felt off to them. May 18th, 2017 would be the last day that anyone could actually recall seeing Teresa. But the person who said they saw her last was her husband, Christopher. He said she left the house that night around 10 p.m. He said that Teresa was battling mental health issues and she just had to get out of the house. And he said he just went to sleep. On May 19th, Teresa's vehicle is found, but there's no signs of foul play in the vehicle, and Teresa is nowhere to be seen around it. There was nothing of any evidentiary value in the car. So Teresa is reported missing officially. According to neighbors in the neighborhood, some would tell police that Chris was someone who would get very intoxicated, and they could hear him screaming and yelling at Teresa. They actually showed police, or gave police, an audio that they had recorded, I guess, with their phone, where Chris had actually threatened to kill Teresa. Chris is saying, I had nothing to do with whatever happened to her, but he would not let police enter his home and search it. So they were forced to get a search warrant, which they did. And then they spent a very long time searching that house. They combed it top to bottom, and apparently they really didn't find anything. And so was Chris telling the truth? Is this an unusual scenario in which the husband didn't do it? Over the next couple of months, Christopher would get arrested for several petty crimes. That's him pictured there, but he had vandalized a neighbor's lawn. He also was seen trying to basically destroy a neighbor's surveillance camera. I wonder why he was trying to do that. He had also been placed under arrest for DUIs. After one of the DUI arrests, he would be released, but he was given an ankle monitor, and he was going to be due in court, coming up soon. All while his wife is missing. These are a few different of his mugshots. On October 23rd, 2017, he is going to be due in court for this DUI thing within a day or so. But he failed to check in with the police, which he was required to do under the conditions of his release. They also noticed that there was literally no movement of his ankle monitor that day for many, many hours. So they would have police go to his house. When they did, they found Chris dead. He had hung himself. Near his body, they found this exact map and a note that read, Detective Hess, I'm sorry for taking her away from everyone. Find her and put her to rest. I had no right to do what I did. I pray that God forgives me. I love her so much. And there was also apparently another written note confessing that he murdered his wife. According to his note, he murdered her on the night of May 18th, 2017. He had gotten severely intoxicated, as he typically did, and he just snapped at Teresa, and he choked her to death. So the note said that her body was in the Allegan State Game area, specifically at Swan Creek Marsh. And when police go there, they find Teresa exactly where Chris said she would be. 5 months later, finally, Teresa was coming home. Her body had been very badly decomposed, but they could confirm that she died the way Chris said in his note that she died. Chris wrote in his note, quote, I am so sorry for this horrible act. I apologize to her mother, friends, family, and the community for this senseless act. I live with it every moment of the day, and I miss her so much. I did not put her first, and that was my biggest mistake, end quote. Chris was basically always a suspect in this case. They had found out that he was also at times abusive towards her, but sadly, he won't ever face justice because he took the coward's way out. So Teresa did not get any justice at all, unless you consider his death the ultimate justice. But he decided he did not want to pay for the consequences of his actions. At least he cannot hurt anyone ever again. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Timothy Fetter. Viewer discretion is advised. Timothy Wayne Fetter was born on July 30th, 1974. From what I can see, he had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and the 48-year-old had a daughter named Rachel. Tim was a member of the Brotherhood of Steel Horses and also the GTO Club. Tim was a good man. He was a great father. And at the time of this story, he's living in Nashville, Tennessee, and he works with his dad at Brewster's Auto Sales. I think it was the family's auto shop. It was about 5:30 p.m. on January 11th, 2023. Timothy had been working at the auto shop, but was then leaving for the evening. He got into his Pontiac GTO and was leaving for the day, and he said to his dad, I'm going home. Not too soon after Timothy left, his dad was on a phone call. He was actually doing a police report for something completely unrelated. When, according to Bruce Fetter, his father, he heard gunshots ringing from outside. He rushed outside and saw that his son, Tim, was shot outside of his car. Timothy had driven back to the auto shop and I guess was across the street. Bruce ran over to his son. He held him in his arms and was screaming for police to come quick. Police had been called. He watched his son take his last breaths, and he died in his arms. And, Bruce said there was nothing I could do to save him. The shooters, whoever they were not present at the scene. They had already fled. But there were cameras that were able to capture some of these moments. The family would soon put out a sign outside the shop that said Tim's life mattered, while police were still trying to find his killer. And there really wasn't much movement on the case for quite some time. It took 14 months for police to finally make an arrest. A 27-year-old woman named Stephanie Hernandez and her 26-year-old boyfriend Joquez Sangster. I'm not 100% sure how they were identified, but both have now been indicted and charged with second-degree murder. What they believe happened was some kind of road rage incident between Timothy and his car and Joquez and Stephanie and their car. Timothy turned around to go back to the shop, but Joquez and Stephanie in their vehicle hunted him down, followed him until he stopped his car, where they then unloaded on him with a gun. He had been shot in his head. His dad, Bruce, can't understand how this even happened. Bruce would say, quote, "Life is not a video game. You can't just kill somebody and they are back tomorrow." He lost his son forever. As of me filming this in April of 2024, the suspects have not yet gone to trial. But hopefully Timothy Fetter and his family get justice. Hello, true crimerers. I was just sent a message notifying me of a very unfortunate update on a case I covered. I covered the case of missing teenager Ty Husted back in 2022. If you're seeing this on TikTok, you can click the comment and it'll go to that original video. But just a really quick recap, he was last seen on January 22nd, 2018, and he was going to work in Lineville, Missouri, I guess, which is on the Iowa-Missouri border. And he was supposed to be doing work as a power washer at a local pig farm. And then he left the Centerville area with a coworker. And what's extra sad about this is that Ty was expecting the birth of his first child. But unfortunately, he did not get to see that happen. Because sadly today, on April 26, 2024, they have announced that human remains that they had found a little bit ago, they have been identified positively as Ty Husted. The 18-year-old's body was found by a couple of turkey hunters. And this, from what I understand, was on some kind of private land. And it was in northeast Mercer County. They have not released his cause of death. I believe they are still investigating that angle to this, but at the very least, his family knows where he is. This is just not the way they wanted to find him. But police there are still actually asking for help for any information that could help them in this. And so I'm assuming that they have some kind of information to maybe indicate this potentially is a homicide if they're still asking for the public's help. So if you have any information with regards to that, please contact 641-437-7100. You can report your information anonymously. You do not have to say who you are. You just have to say what you know. And so if you can help Ty's family get some kind of answers, closure, anything, please do so. It took over 30 years to finally solve her murder. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Vicki Johnson. Viewer discretion is advised. I really, unfortunately, don't have a lot of background information on Vicki. I know she was born on February 19th, 1956, and at the time of this case, she's living here in Seaside, California, which is in Northern California. And I also know that she had 3 sons at the time this case occurred. It was the early morning hours of January 3rd, 1991, here in this neighborhood in Seaside, California, specifically at Sabato Park. When police were walking the park, they actually found a body, and it was of a woman who was lying face down in the sand in the playground. The coroner would determine that she endured a very brutal death. She was strangled and also suffocated. She actually had like handfuls of sand down her throat. so it appeared she was likely choking on the sand as her face was being pressed into it. She also had bite marks on her body. Her clothing had been ripped off, and she was set on fire. When police arrived, the fire was out, but they could clearly tell she had been on fire. They were able to determine that this was the body of Vicki Johnson. She was just 34 years old. This was during a time in a location in Seaside where there was a lot of violent crime happening. This was due a lot to the drug epidemic. And so nobody talked, nobody said a thing about this case. Nobody saw it, nobody heard it, or at the very least, nobody would come forward to say they saw it or heard it. It's crazy that someone can endure this level of an attack and no one hear it or see it. There wasn't any indication that she was sexually assaulted, and so they really didn't have much forensic evidence. And so sadly, her case goes cold for a very long time. Fast forward to about 30 or so years later, technology has advanced greatly. They are able to take scrapings that were done underneath all of her fingernails. They took those scrapings way back at the beginning of this. And so they took them and they were able to build a DNA profile. And there was some DNA that belonged to her, but there was also DNA that belonged to a male. They plugged it in their system and they got a hit. It came back to matching a known criminal in the area named Frank Louis McClure. However, he would never face justice for killing Vicki. And they'll also never know why he did it and what the circumstances were that led him to do it. Because he died in 2021 peacefully in his sleep. And so sadly, Vicki Johnson and her 3 children and her family, they will never get the justice that she very rightfully deserved. Late afternoon of March 8th, 1966, this man would walk up and randomly murder a 7-year-old girl. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Wendy Wolin. Viewer discretion is advised. March 8th, 1966, at approximately 4 p.m., just outside the Pierce Manor apartments in New Jersey, 7-year-old Wendy Wolin was standing just outside the building waiting for her mom to pull up the car because they were about to go shopping and then pick up her older sister from school. All of a sudden, a man walks up to Wendy as she's kind of pacing up and down the sidewalk, just being a kid. This man walks up to her and she says, punches her directly in the stomach, and then he just runs away. Wendy immediately bowled over in pain, and a neighbor who had seen what happened runs across the street to ask if she's okay. She says, "No, I just got punched in the stomach by that guy." The fire department just so happened to be right across the street. Realizing it would take too long for an ambulance to get there, one of the firemen basically drives her to the hospital. But by the time she arrives, it's already too late. Wendy Wolin is dead. Wendy wasn't punched in the stomach. Wendy had been stabbed. This man walked up to the 7-year-old girl out of absolutely nowhere, thrust a knife directly into her abdomen, and then just walked and ran away. Less than an hour later, she was pronounced dead. Wendy was able to provide a description to people in that hour before she passed away, and other witnesses also saw the man, and they gave a very detailed description. This is that composite drawing made of her killer. A day later, they find a knife thrown away in some bushes. They would find out that this was the murder weapon. Why on earth what happened here? Well, it turns out she wasn't the only attack victim that day. Less than 10 minutes earlier, a man wearing similar clothing walked up to a 7th grade girl as she was leaving her Catholic school, and he punched her directly in her face. Earlier that day, another young girl was stabbed in the buttocks, but she would survive. And this was another very random attack. Again, by a man with a very similar description. I mean, this completely shocked the community, and of course it did. Who does this? A random guy going around physically assaulting and stabbing random children? That's insane. And he's never been caught. A year prior, in 1965, this mother and daughter, Anna and May Rubenstein, well, they had been stabbed inside their home. When a neighbor saw this composite drawing, she said, "That's the guy who I saw outside that house that day." Their murders are also unsolved. But police believe their murders were related to the mob. Something to do with like a father or grandfather owed money to them but wasn't paying. And this was like a retaliation murder. But that's never been proven. This guy was never caught, and he never will be. 4 indigenous women, one of them still unidentified, and nobody seems to really care about finding them. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Winnipeg 4. Viewer discretion is advised. Pictured here was 24-year-old Rebecca Contois. She was a First Nations member living in Winnipeg, which is in Canada. On May 16, 2022, there were some partial human remains found inside of a garbage bin at the 200 block of Edison Avenue, which is in North Kildonan. This would end up taking police there in Canada to the Brady landfill, where on June 14, 2022, they uncovered more human remains there. Those remains, along with the remains found in the garbage bin, would all be identified as belonging to 24-year-old Rebecca Contois. Obviously, she was the victim of a homicide. The location of the garbage bin would help police connect that to a particular man, 35-year-old Jeremy Skibicki. And this guy is a real freaking douche. He is a seemingly proud white supremacist. According to witnesses and social media posts, he is incredibly anti-Semitic and misogynistic, and he had a very violent history against women. That's a lot of face. He has had numerous protection orders against him from women, previous girlfriends, wives, because he was physically abusive to them. And I'm talking like he punched these women just directly in the face. He threatened to kill these women should they ever try to go to police. He had smothered his partners before with a pillow to the point where one of them, it caused their teeth to start bleeding. He has also been accused of raping his previous partners as they tried to sleep. He says he is a member of Holy Europe and also a member of the Alliance of Patriotic Parallel Movements of European Folks, or the APPMEF. Yeah, I can think of a real MF that you are. It is described as a far-right organization that basically states that white people need to preserve their bloodlines and not dilute them by race mixing. Is there ever a time where you just want to reach into your phone and just like someone, you know? But there was enough physical evidence that they were able to arrest and charge Jeremy Skibicki with the first-degree murder of Rebecca Contois. But it did not stop there. 2 other indigenous women who had been reported missing recently, 39-year-old Morgan Harris and 26-year-old Mercedes Myron. Well, police believe that both of those women are deceased, murdered by Jeremy Skibicki. Exactly what evidence they had to link him, I'm not 100% sure yet. I'm actually filming this video literally as his trial is currently ongoing, so there will probably be more information that comes out. But they were able to link him to their disappearances and potential murders. There was also a 4th individual. It doesn't sound like they can absolutely confirm that this person is also First Nations like the other 3 women, but they are pretty confident that she is. They have given her the name Moshkade Bijakikwe and are referring to her also as Buffalo Woman. Now, they allegedly have evidence to suggest that the bodies of those 3 women are at the Prairie Green landfill. This is an overhead view of that landfill, but they have not searched that landfill thoroughly to find them. And it has been a gigantic ordeal for them to even do that. It has caused a lot of debate and a lot of friction in this community about like why on earth they just won't go in there and search. It has been a political talking point. It was a prominent thing during their recent elections. Their Conservative Party basically said, we're not going to search it. And then their New Democrat Party said that if they were to win the election, they would absolutely support a search of the landfill. And I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but the New Democrat Party, they won the election. And so there is hope that it will be searched, but it still hasn't been done yet. They've done studies into what it would cost to search the landfill. They have put money into the research of finding out how much money it would cost to search it. If I'm reading this all correctly. One report said it would be like close to $200 million and 3 years worth of time to search this properly. Another one said it would be somewhere under $100 million. They've also tried to use the excuse of, well, it's full of asbestos, and if we dig up all that stuff, it'll go, downwind and it'll affect the community. The thing is there's really no community near it. Like, no one's actually in danger of, like, asbestos clouds going towards them. And for the people who are searching it, there's protective gear for that. And so it has been a nightmare to search this place, to even begin searching it, to find their remains, which police have said they believe their remains are there, along with the third unidentified woman. The families have protested, they have spoken out, they have begged, please find our missing and likely murdered family. The Indigenous and First Nations community has done vigils. They have done roadblocks at the landfills. They just want it to be searched to find these women, but they just will not do it. And gee, I wonder why that is. We all know why it is. And if you don't know, or if you want to deny it, then you are the problem. You're part of it. They are Indigenous women. The 3 missing women are Indigenous. They're First Nations. They aren't Caucasian. Because if these were blonde, blue-eyed white girls, well, we all know that they would move Earth to find them. It shouldn't have to be a fight to search for bodies of missing women, especially you're saying you are pretty confident where they are, then go look for them. Because their families deserve to be able to lay them to rest. You're basically saying, oh, it's okay that their bodies are just chucked in a landfill somewhere, buried under God knows what. Oh well. And as often you have stories where, well, these Indigenous women, they're what? They're sex workers, they're poor, they're not prominent members of society, so who cares, right? Well, I do, and a lot of people do, but it's never the right people that seem to care. The people who can actually physically do something about it. What's really sad is, like, I know that if I were to go missing tomorrow or something bad, right, I would probably get a lot of coverage, right? I would probably be on, not because of any of this, but because I'm just a white dude who goes missing. Like, I know I would at least be on the news for at least a week or two. And I know that people would actually go out there looking for me because, well, they deserve the same. They deserve more. They deserve anything, something. Try being in their position. If you're like one of these people who is pushing to not search the landfills, right? Try putting yourself in their family's shoes if that's even physically possible for your little brains to do. And imagine that these are your daughters, your niece, your aunt, your sister, your mom, your whatever. You would probably do anything you could think of to find them. But because they aren't your family, But at least in some way, hopefully, these women will all get justice, all 4 of them, because he is now charged with 4 counts of murder. 3 of them are no body cases, which, gee, if you would just go look for them, maybe you'd have more evidence to help convict the guy. I don't know, maybe. But hopefully they have enough, because like I said, the trial is currently going as I'm filming this video. And so I hope that these women all get justice, and I hope this monster is put away forever. But even if he does get put away forever, that's still not the end of this story. It won't end until they are all found. It won't be over until all of these stolen sisters are back home with their families where they can lay them to rest. And everybody should care about that. What the was this movie? What was this? I'm buffering because I don't have the word. What was this movie? I had never heard of this movie before, and odds are maybe you haven't either. I was just scrolling through Amazon Prime, and this came across my thing as a horror movie. And I need therapy. Well, I've alwaed needed therapy, but I need more therapy after this. Hey Mike, what's the movie about? I have no idea. The whole thing is recorded on a toaster, clearly. It's just grainy. You don't see a thing. They don't show people. You barely see people. When they show people, it's like, is that a person that I'm seeing? I don't even know. It's like someone took their camera, forgot it was recording, and left it on the ground, and it was just pointing at walls in the corners of hallways. I don't know. I No idea what was happening. No idea. The plot says it's about two kids who wake up in the middle of the night and their dad is missing. What I saw was... and I kind of liked it. I know that doesn't sound like oh, God. It's called Skinamarink. It's apparently, according to the director of the movie, it's purposefully misspelled of that, Skinamarink, because he didn't want kids to look up the lyrics to that song or whatever and then find this movie. I have a headache. I may have a tumor growing in my head at this point. You heard the distant sounds of children talking. You heard cartoons playing in the background. And sometimes you would hear like Charlie Brown adults talking and like... Hey, it's unlike anything you've ever seen before. There's that. It's different. It's unique. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's special, maybe it's Maybelline. I don't know what the it is, or was, or is, or what. But a part of me enjoyed it. I kind of, enjoyed it, I liked it. Oh God. I need to go take my medication now, because... What was that I dug it, though. Yeah, I did, I think, right? Did I like it? Maybe.